found it. The tip of the spear. It is the Alex Jones Show.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is Sunday, already the 12th day of November 2017. I just talked to Roger Stone about an hour ago. He's been talking to some high-level White House sources, pretty high level. And we're going to be giving you exclusive intel from inside the fake Robert Mueller investigation on why the president is so hopping mad and what's been discovered about former CIA Director James Woolsey and that supposed meeting he had with General Flynn. And then it gets even crazier. CNN is reporting, as we told you about 2 weeks ago, exclusively here from our sources, that the Podesta group, run by Tony Podesta and propped up by his political operative brother John Podesta, is set to close this Wednesday, the 15th of November, in just 3.5 days. That illustrates a lot. So we're going to give you the inside baseball, as they say, on that coming up at the bottom of the hour today. And then there is so much more to get to as well. On Thursday, our intrepid Merkel Phelan wrote about Vault 8 data leak from WikiLeaks on the CIA and the NSA, and how it shows the agencies going around setting up citizens, foreign governments, you name it. Drudgereport.com, link to it. Again, get today's news 3 days early at InfoWars.com and find out why they had congressional hearings calling for us to be shut down just 10 days ago. Because we will fight for the Republic against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Here's the New York Times. Security breach and spilled secrets have shaken the NSA to its core. And they make it about the NSA. It's the NSA data systems. It's the NSA lines and systems being used. It's the CIA running it. So that's a classic from the big daddy agency, CIA, that's senior to NSA. It was CIA, NSA, and down from that. The second biggest agency is NSA. I'm not defending NSA. You just got to love how everything's spin, but when you know it, you see it. It's just incredible. So that is all coming up. We've also got a new pre-crime computer, privacy fears of artificial intelligence as a crime stopper. That's coming up. And then, did you know in Europe and Australia they banned Father's Day? Fathers existing as evil. Here's the Herald Sun. I know this is old news. I saw it a few months late. Father's Day ad pull, too political to praise dads. And then we got all these other anti-father ads. That's coming up. An amazing video. It's critical to everything. Vietnam War veteran cries on President Trump's shoulder during Vietnam speech. And why is it so important? Whether you believe Trump's sincere or not, which we know he's sincere from the evidence, the fact that he's honoring vets and the fact that he's being personal activates human emotion and behavior, and it's something the globalists don't want is real humanity. It's beautiful. That's coming up as well. Plus, ISIS has a direct threat to Trump as president arrives in new home of jihad. That's all coming up today, ladies and gentlemen. And a review. I don't watch a lot of TV. I don't watch a lot of movies. I might watch 2 hours of television a week. Maybe if I'm working out, I tend to just rather listen to music. But I started watching Stranger Things. That's the #1 TV show right now on Netflix. And I got 5, 6 episodes into it. I guess 5 yesterday, 6 today. And it is incredible propaganda. I mean, you talk about in-your-face revelation of the method, the secrets of Stranger Things, from the progenitor of the global awakening against these things, coming up in the final segment of the second hour tonight. So this is a big global transmission. Roger Stone in 25 minutes joins us with breaking high-level White House intel. Then Darren McBreen joins us in studio as well. NewsWars.com, PresidentPlanet.com, InfoWars.com are our humble attack frigates in the fight. When you spread the links, you make their engines turn and their cannons fire. Ladies and gentlemen, we are live broadcasting worldwide on this Sunday global transmission. It is already the 12th day of November 2017. Thank you for joining us. We've got an extraordinary transmission lined up for you tonight. But let me just start with something that I should have started with on the Friday show, because I'm live 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., as most folks know that are watching weekdays, syndicated on stations across the country, radio and TV. InfoWars.com/show. If radio listeners want to actually add a dimension to it and actually see what we're doing here and actually see the clips and read the articles for themselves. I saw a video on Thursday night of Sean Parker, the former president of Facebook, legendary hacker, computer programmer, you name it. Well, I got to meet once here in Austin. And he was saying Facebook targets and exploits your weaknesses. It targets and exploits your psychology. It makes you depressed by design. And it's very, very evil. And we consciously knew this when we did it. So Thursday night, I see that when I'm at home, kind of getting ready for the next day's show. I spend 2-3 hours at night sometimes getting ready, and then a few hours in the morning. And I sent Nico Acosta, our head producer, the clips on the computer. I emailed him and I said, I want to leave the show with this tomorrow, but I didn't. Because Congressman Gates out of California came out and said, yeah, they're getting ready for martial law and the forceful removal of Trump with a coup. And they broke down how they're preparing for it and how they're trying to get people on Capitol Hill ready to go along with it. And I can see how I kind of didn't go with my lead story, because when I got up in the morning, Steve Watson at InfoWars.com had written a story about that. But once I kind of backed off from that story, once I already covered it, it was accurate. Once I'd already gone over it, I realized we've already talked about that a lot. They already got Phil Mudd of the CIA saying we're going to kill Trump on CNN. You already see the hashtag hunt Republicans, kill cops. I mean, you already see all the revolutionary fervor. Governor Jerry Brown just said, we need to kill people that don't want to pay carbon taxes and put them 6 feet under. Well, we've got that speech. We can play for you. It's on InfoWars.com. So it's like, hey, we know they're revolutionary, they're bullies, they're criminals, they'll kill us if we don't do what they say. Thank God we have a Second Amendment. But to have Sean Parker, multi-billionaire, founder of Napster, one of the co-founders of Facebook and so many other big endeavors, who was so crazed when I met him, he wasn't on drugs, it was natural, super intelligent, that he just walked up to me and went, Alex Jones, I can't believe you're here. He goes, I'm leaving, and just ran down the hall, out the door, at a party I was invited to by a rock star. And that's just a funny little story, because I said, well, I don't know what that guy's problem is, but okay, he ran from me like Casper the Friendly Ghost. Somebody sees a ghost, they run out the door so hard they just put a hole through the door and there's a silhouette of their body. But I don't need to believe Sean Parker. I read documents 20 years ago and 10 years ago and 5 years ago. I talked to former CIA section chiefs about this that were at MIT in the 70s. I did my research, because the elite acts like you're all idiots or I'm an idiot, and then we won't actually go read what's been written in published books by them. People ask, how do I know all this stuff? Why does everything keep coming true I talk about? Why does the media create all these fake things I didn't talk about to attribute to me to try to make people not tune in? It's because I actually went and read what they said they were going to build. And here's the bad news. Most of it they've been able to do. The good news is we now know they mean what they're saying. We can stop them. We have the intel, because a long-term program like this can be stopped if you're aware of it, even in its final 20% or so. So Sean Parker, co-founder of Facebook, bashed his company saying it was built to exploit human vulnerability. That's CNBC. You'll be on Facebook, folks, and they pop up serotonin reuptake inhibitor, Prozac ads, and psychological test ads, and they admit they're targeting leftists. I mean, this was in the news in January of this year. Australian executives leaked it, risking their lives, not just their money, to say, we're exploiting, especially leftists. We want to keep them desperate, alone, with fake bot friends, and freak them out about Trump and ruin their lives. That's why they're so deranged, folks. They've been hit with AI computers. And by the way, Facebook's fighting back. I'm not at liberty to get into it at this point, but they've hit the friendly thing and the negative deal. They've hit us with the negative, full manipulation of their operatives, and their positive, hey, stop it, Alex. I've been hit in the last 2 days, and we recorded a lot of it, so just get ready. Okay? So all of this is going on. Their congressional hearings saying shut us down. And Sean Parker comes out and says we're exploiting people, we're using them, we're manipulating them, we're using their weaknesses, we're making them more depressed. And he basically says it all. It's incredible. Is he hedging his bets like Donna Brazil? What's happening? Here's the first clip.
That thought process was all about how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible. And that means that we need to sort of give you a little dopamine hit every once in a while because someone liked or commented on
which you get climbing the hill,
or whatever.
Or asking a girl out.
That's going to get you to contribute more.
Or getting in a fist fight.
And that's going to get you, you know, more likes and comments. And it's a balance.
It's a fist fight.
Feedback loop. That it's like a, I mean, it's exactly the kind of thing that a hacker like myself would come up with, because you're exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. And I think that the inventors, creators, you know, it's me, it's Mark, it's the, you know, Kevin Systrom at Instagram, it's all of these people, understood this consciously, and we did it anyway.
But did you understand the next 100 moves, my friends? Or did you see the moves before they were even announced? He now begins to understand that. That's why he's doing this. Let's go to the next clip. Talking about children. Here it is.
And then they would say, no. I value my real life interactions. I value the moment. I value presence, and I value intimacy. And I would say, well, you're a conscientious objector. That's okay. You don't have to participate, but, you know, we'll get you eventually. and like, I don't know if I really understood the consequences of what I was saying. Because the unintended consequences of a network when it grows to 1 billion or 2 billion people, and it literally changes your relationship with society, with each other, with it probably interferes with productivity in weird ways.
I think Parker's freaked out now. Wait till 5 years later.
You know, anxiety is a huge problem now. Of course, anxiety is always a big problem. The surveys that have been going on for years are showing a huge rise in anxiety amongst high school kids and younger. And you know, you have to wonder if there isn't some, you know, if the thought process that went into building these applications, the first of them, to really understand it. That thought process was all about how do we consume as much of your time and
your soul. All right, I want to cover something right now. It's very, very heartfelt, and it's not artificial. Trump understands the personal touch. You know, it was confirmed by General Kelly and others that Obama did not call the family members of troops that died. He would occasionally, if someone was being part of a political function, like Khan and his Gold Star family, that Obama did call a few of the families. But Trump has called hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of families. And that was later confirmed. And Trump, with one understanding, takes serious value in personal conversations and personal connections. And he calls every police officer that gets killed in the United States, he calls their family. When I got remarried, didn't even tell Trump about it, didn't even know about it. Trump called me, called my wife separately. I haven't gotten to that full story, and he just relishes it. Now, the globalists want you to only be emotional when they say about the topics they want. It's about using the words they want or doing what they say, or it's all manipulation with a bunch of actors. With Trump, it's spontaneous, where he just says, bring the whole crowd up here. Let's just see what they do. The Secret Service tries to stop him, and he countermands them. And then Trump, I reported on this a year ago, but it's now been in the news. Trump keeps a yellow notepad, or one of his scribble does, and he writes down everything. It has a really good memory like that. And he writes down things they want, things they say, and he takes what he gets, just like it's a Trump Tower or a golf course, what his supporters or members want. And then he looks at it, is it reasonable, does it resonate, and then he takes action on it. So he's like the opposite of the psychic vampire. He wants to give, because then he gets even better back. That's the big secret. Psychic vampires think you're taking only. No, you give, you get back even more. So I said, it's just selfish person. And I've been a good person my whole life, okay? I'm not out to give people, but I'm meaner than hell. But anyway, I figured out like this: reap what you sow. What comes around goes around. Treat others as you want to be treated, what Jesus said. Man, I'm all about it, because the better I do, I was already inclined to do it, but now the more fearless, the more focused, the more giving I am, it just comes back. It's incredible. So the media's making jokes about this. They're attacking you, and they're also attacking him. Kim Jong-un calling him old and stupid. He said, well, you're short and fat. But I never say that. It's a joke. Like, I never call you short and fat. Like, you just called me old and stupid. It's that joke. To turn a phrase. Vietnam War veteran cries on President Trump's shoulder during Vietnam speech. The liberal mainstream media hit this beautiful moment from American people. It does not fit their narrative. Well, they hit it. They've also been attacking it some. President Donald J. Trump is on his 14-day Asia trip. And, you know, what's interesting here is when they instantly see something, they'll attack it. But when they don't know what to do, they wait a day. Now they are attacking. So he's on his 14-day East Asia trip. It's gone so well. Starting in Japan and the Philippines next week, President Trump attended the APEC summit in Da Nang, Vietnam on Friday and Saturday. On Saturday, President Trump delivered a speech in the Da Nang, Vietnam on Veterans Day. Behind him stood several U.S. veterans from the Vietnam War. President Trump delivered another astounding speech in honor of the veterans. And during it, one of the veterans came and broke down on his shoulder. This is so powerful. Here it is.
Thank you for your support of the military. And it's an honor to be here as one of 7 Vietnam veterans representing the 58,000 heroes who never made it home. Thank you so much.
I'm nervous. You know, it's an honor for me to be here.
And again, it's just a short little thing, but Trump has that effect on people because it's real. He's not a saint. He wants families to be strong. He wants to have a future. He's pro-human. He doesn't want to break up families. He doesn't want to attack Christians. He doesn't want to not have prosperity. He's not a Satanist. He's not out to get you. And those of us that aren't Satanists, we don't understand the selfishness of somebody that doesn't just want to have things their way, but wants to have it at your expense. And that's what's so powerful. Trump should lay off of WikiLeaks. That's the reason he got elected. Out of a lot of reasons, they're a big part of it, part of that trifecta. And you know, he should lay off. You know, he should expand vaccine investigations, like he said he would do. And, you know, he said he wouldn't expand the Afghan war, and he has, claiming to clean it up, get out, but we'll see. He means well, but he's done some bad things. But if you weigh things, the good he's done versus the bad he's done, the good way outweighs the bad. And you know a man by his enemies. The way they're out to get him shows you everything. Speaking of that, we've got a special that will end today. It has to end today because a bunch of the products, I just pick the sales. I decide. Nobody argues with me. They should. Tim J pointed out, hey, 3 of these things actually lose money. When they do auto ship, they really lose like $10. You need to stop this because they showed me the math actually this morning. I came in and they go, yeah, you brought in a couple $100,000 a day, but there's no money here because free shipping, 50% off products that aren't marked up at 100%. Well, you cut them 50%, that cuts out the problem. But I say it's going to turn out good because 50% off on apparel, t-shirts as low as like $5 a piece. The average price $9.95. Some of them are made in America. They cost that much in made in America. Super Mineral Vitality, 50% off. Super Blue Fluoride Free Toothpaste, 50% off. Vitamin Mineral Fusion, 50% off. Anthroplex, a bunch of other stuff. Biome Defense Probiotic, 50% off. DNA Force just got back in. It is 25% off. Very, very costly product for us to produce, proven with studies to detoxify your DNA, your mitochondria, your cells. That's back in stock. The enemy wants to shut us down, as you've all seen. And if you'll just go there and find a T-shirt, a water filter, a shower filter, non-GMO heirloom seeds, books, films, T-shirts, supplements. There's thousands of items. Car jumping systems are the very best, lowest price. Shortwave radios, AM/FM emergency radios, walkie-talkies, optics, lower thirds for rifles. It's all there. Just whatever's the best, we go get it, getting a good price. A lot of times lower than Amazon. Sworn to destroy you, sworn to destroy America. It's taxpayer money. We get zero taxpayer money. InfoWarsStore.com. If you'll just commit, go to InfoWarsStore.com and check out the products at least, and then take advantage of free shipping and try like Secret 12, the very best vitamin B12. I'm talking about energy, health, you name it. Mola Lame shirts for men and women. About to sell a bunch of special design shirts. We've got this anti-fascism, anti-communism shirt that triggers the Antifa. It's only this month, so we've got about 2 weeks left on that selling. InfoWarsStore.com or 888-253-3139. Quite frankly, we deliver. And that means we're right square in the enemy's court, in front of them, under attack. And quite frankly, psychically, spiritually, it's been quite interesting. And it's definitely interesting to plug into this, both good and evil. But I can tell you right now, if you're not praying for us, and if you're not buying the products, if you're not spreading the links, you might as well join the New World Order, because we're at point-blank range. Point-blank range hurt them bad, but it's like being electrocuted, I'll be honest with you. And when you take action and pray for us, it energizes us and lets us win. When you don't, it's like vision in hell. So there's highs and lows. I want to thank you all for tuning in on the Sunday broadcast. I want to thank all the affiliates and all the sponsors, but also this amazing crew that we've got here. Alia and everybody else in there just does an amazing job. Marcos Morales here like 6 years. I just take that guy for given like a fixture. What an amazing person. This has been such a fight here, ladies and gentlemen. And when I tell you Roger Stone is a direct plug-in to Donald Trump, everybody knows that. He doesn't want to make a big deal out of it, but, you know, the media calls him a dirty trickster and all this stuff, and he just takes on their attacks and makes a joke out of it. But the truth is, he's a big sweetheart. He's against evil government. He's not a villain, like they've said, or I wouldn't be involved with him. His information has been the most accurate, continued information I've gotten from anybody, except for my few conversations with the president, where he did exactly what he said he would do. And of course, they have Get Me Roger Stone, the Netflix series was a big hit, and all the rest of it. They banned him on Twitter 2 weeks ago. He's filing suit. They had congressional hearings a week and a half ago. Twitter, Facebook, Google saying they were censoring me at lunch because we said a Muslim ran over folks with a truck. That's the weird thing, is they've got these con games going where they go, Jones says the sun is yellow, he's a liar, it's purple. And it's just like, well, what is the game where they hide it in plain view and like discredit themselves? Is it just an appeal to power? Where they just think because they're in Congress and they're before a committee and they're the heads of technology or heads of operations for the big three internet giants that I was at lunch and I saw about the attack and they said it was Islamic and that the mayor had been warned and that needs to be banned. Sir, we banned it at lunch. Yes, we banned it. And then it was all true. It was a Fox News clip. And again, it's next level. But I wanted to get Roger on because...
Oh, my bad. I forgot to turn the mic off. Someone should have said something.
I was actually up here already working, and he texted me, he said, I got huge breaking news. And again, it's big news, but it's a microcosm into how things work on multiple fronts. It's been announced by CNN, what he said 3 weeks ago here, that the Podesta, largest lobbying firm in D.C., by Tony Podesta, was shutting down this next Wednesday. It's officially closed Wednesday. And you see Saturday Night Live turning against the Clintons now. Donna Brazile, Wolf Blitzer, Chris Hayes. I mean, this is definitely an exodus as they figure out the public hates these people, and there's indictments reportedly out there. Now, I've been told by my sources, when I talked to Roger 2 hours ago, he said, about an hour before airtime, he said, Alex, I am not going to answer that question because of sources, but I think you're in the right direction. So my source that they not just Tony, but that John's going to be indicted. That's from other sources I have. I'll just tell you, in the Pentagon and the FBI. I'll leave it at that. And they've not been wrong either, but I haven't gotten 500 pieces of info from them like Stone. I've gotten 30, 40 pieces from each group. I actually can't believe how honorable people in the government are, actually, with all the intel we're given. But I guess we're only the ones crazy enough to put it out. So he's got huge General Flynn Mueller investigation stuff that deals with the whole investigation, not just Flynn. And then he's got huge news, obviously, with the Podestas, John Podesta and Tony Podesta, and the announcement that the lobbying firm is closing next Wednesday. Roger Stone, thank you for joining us, my friend.
Alex, great to be here. I think most Americans saw blaring headlines that the special counsel, Robert Mueller, had opened up an investigation into General Michael Flynn in connection with a $15 million Turkish kidnap plot in which it is alleged that Turkish interests engaged or spoke to General Flynn for essentially an extrajudicial kidnapping and extradition of a religious fanatic who not so long ago masterminded an uprising and an attempted coup in Turkey. It's also fair to say that the Gulen, as he is known, who was held up in Pennsylvania in the Poconos, is engaged in a myriad of other federal crimes. But ironically, the investigation into General Flynn stems solely on the memory of former FBI Director James Woolsey. The mainstream media tells us that Woolsey was partners with Flynn in his public affairs firm, and that he was the one pointing the finger at the general. Now, if you look at this stunning interview that he actually gave, he implicates he implicates Flynn, saying he heard in a hotel room when he came in at the end and Flynn was present, some discussion of an extrajudicial kidnapping. Then later in the tape, he attempts to back off of it as if he hadn't said that previously, and said, of course, that none of this was known entirety or in the first person. So he purposely maligns Flynn. Flynn has vehemently denied that he sat in on any discussion of kidnapping. He understood the angst that the Turkish had about the crimes of the Gulen in the United States, and yes, those should be brought to the attention of law enforcement. But Woolsey has impugned a good man, and that stunning interview shows his treachery. Here is the truth. Woolsey was never partners with Flynn. He was on an advisory board, uncompensated in Flynn's group. He badgered Flynn relentlessly about the ability to make money. He himself wanted the Turkish account, a $15 million lobbying account, perfectly legal. His wife, driven by greed and money, had actually told the Turks $15 million was the price tag, and they were incensed when they quite legally engaged General Flynn, for which he was paid $500,000, most of which my sources tell me went to subcontractors in an effort to educate the Justice Department about some things that the Gulen has been doing in this country that are illegal. So the entire thing here is because Woolsey, who Trump never likes, even on the campaign stump, Woolsey is a deep stater, Alex, who attaches himself to Trump. Trump does not want him on the road, only wants Flynn to travel with him. And indeed, Mike Flynn's representation of the Turks begins at a time that when he is a private citizen in private practice and spending all of his time campaigning with and for Donald Trump, almost 30 days on the road, introducing Trump at these enormous rallies. So I think a great American patriot is being framed here, and I think Woolsey is a deep state quisling who is doing the dirty work of the Bushes and the Clintons, is pointing a finger at an innocent
there's no
man.
doubt. There's no doubt about all of that, and of course you get that from your sources very high up. But expanding, we're about to go to break. What do you make of Brazil's come out? We've talked about it. Now Chris Hayes, now Wolf Blitzer, basically all of them are throwing the Clintons under the bus, something I've never seen before. What does this signify?
Well, the professional Democrats have figured out that the Clintons are a burden that they're just no longer willing to handle. Most of the anti-Clinton activity you see is being orchestrated by the Obamas, who are ready to turn the page to set the stage for a potential candidacy by Michelle Obama. Michelle Obama should not be underestimated as a candidate. We can make snide jokes about her all we like, but she commands a greater loyalty in the Democratic Party base, and the far left indeed, than Hillary Clinton ever did. And her husband controls the machinery of the Democratic Party. Joe Biden talking about running is a joke. Joe Biden is an enfeebled old man who can't keep his hands off of young girls and women, not his wife. It's quite creepy.
Well, that's the big subject I want to cover with you next. I mean, the Republican Party's nasty. It's corrupt. It's being removed. We're in a battle there. That's our real problem. But the Democrats, what does it mean when you've got all the Democrat media and things like Saturday Night Live turning against the Clintons? What does that signify? Straight ahead with Roger Stone. I'm Alex Jones with NewsWars.com. NewsWars.com. All right, coming up in the next hour, I'm going to air the 60 Minutes piece, and I'm going to air the CNN piece, and I'm going to air the Saturday Night Live piece, and others if I have time to get to them all. They're up on InfoWars.com, where mainstream media is like, Bill and Hillary Clinton corrupt. They need to pay for their sex crimes. They need to pay for covering up the assaults on women. They need to pay for working with the Russians. They need to pay for working with the Chinese. I'm like, when did they become the Alex Jones channel? It's crazy. So what does that signify? Just Roger was on a few weeks ago. He said, hey, Hillary says she's going to run again in 2020. We're going to support our exploratory committee. And I said to Roger off air, I said, I almost don't want to give them our plan and make jokes about this because they still think Hillary's their girl. But now all of them are turning against her. The entire system. Meanwhile, at the very moment, the Republicans are trying to get rid of Roy Moore. And I'm not saying he's perfect. If he did things they're claiming, then I say crucify him. But now some of the accusers have gone offline. Others are, Democratic Party operatives. All this other stuff's going on. My big issue is
not enough money.
Our big problem is the Republican Party. Just because we're defeating the Democrats and America's turned on them in a political realignment, how do we make sure we get good people in the Republican Party to turn this around? But Roger, what do you make of the point we've gotten to when clearly months ago I said they're starting to eat the Clintons, they're turning on them, they're going to use the Harvey Weinstein thing as a trigger to go after everybody. I mean, now that's happened. What is the next shoe to drop, and what do you make of the complete exodus against the Clintons?
I think this is a very key point, Alex, and that is many on the right have long believed that the ruling elite was monolithic and that they moved in total concert through their groups such as the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, and, of course, the Bilderbergers. That's not entirely true. They have their own intramural struggles. The Rockefellers always wanted ultimate power. They never got the presidency. The Kennedys had to fight the Rockefellers, and the Harrimans had to fight both of them for supremacy within the establishment. What you have here is a purge, very much like the purge in Saudi Arabia, where the hard left, who see the Democratic Party as their vehicle and long-term investment, realize that Bill and Hillary are dead weight, that Bill's rapes and his assault on women can no longer be suppressed, that Hillary's role in covering it up is now too widely known, that the epic scam of the Clinton Foundation, if they follow the path laid out by the brilliant Charles Ortel, will lead to indictments ultimately for the violation of multiple laws, because the Clintons indeed would steal a hot stove. Deeply resented in Obama land is the profiteering. It's not just, for example, that Hillary negotiated an agreement with the Obama administration regarding her contacts and handling of her foundation while she was Secretary of State, then made sure that the agreement was not legally binding, and then continuously violated it in violation of what she had agreed to with Barack. Is it surprising that Obama is ready to download this, dead weight?
That's a really good point. So if I pull back from this, though, obviously they know their political party's in trouble. Getting rid of the Clintons now, that's a day late, a dollar short, as they say. this is a metastasizing cancer. Then they've got all these other corrupt interests in there as well. Why didn't they see this before?
Well, the Clintons' hammerlock on the party money and her standing in the party based on a very strong run against Obama gave her the, and the nasty tactics and air of inevitability. Professional Democrats, many of them whom I know and drink with, who despise her, supported her candidacy because the Clintons were notoriously vengeful. They were
sure. So what are they saying about her now?
Look, I think they view her as dead meat, but don't think that means they've changed their ideology or that they've changed their game plan to push a communist, socialist, leftist agenda.
And that was my next point. That was my next point, what you just said. They are trying to jettison her because she's not leftist and globalist and racist enough. They think she's posing as that. And so this shows how they admittedly have gotten even more radical and even more mentally ill.
Well, look, and I should address two other key points here. My sources tell me that the attacks against Judge Roy Moore, which are almost 40 years ago, these are not convictions. These are merely accusations looking sketchier and sketchier the more they are examined. I'm told that this was cooked up and packaged by the diabolical Karl Rove at the behest of Mitch McConnell. This is the payback for the pasting of their hand-picked candidate, Luther Strange. And they're endangering a seat for the Senate, and they don't seem to care. When McConnell called on Moore to withdraw, he knew legally that there was no way to do that his name cannot be removed from the ballot at this point, regardless of any statement.
What do you make of a lot of polls that are up on InfoWars.com showing Moore has gotten even bigger lead since this happened? It looks like Alabamans are just sick of dirty tricks.
Well, that could be the case. In all honesty, it's a little soon to poll it because it's still nuclear. I mean, Roy Moore is trending, but someone has taken advantage of what is a national disgrace, and that is all these leftist hypocrites who claim to love feminism and be feminists turning out to be sexual harassers. I mean, Weinstein is no different than Bill Clinton, for example.
How would you grade Trump? I mean, Afghanistan, he said he wouldn't expand it. He did. He's been wrong on vaccines. He said he would try to expose it. He didn't. He's bad on WikiLeaks. I mean, let's say the things he's bad on. But overall, the elite hate him. He's got the economy going. He's bringing back free speech, anti-political correctness. I mean, what's good about Trump in 3 minutes? What's bad about Trump?
A record stock market, unemployment at the lowest point in American history, very, very aggressively trying to hack back regulations in all departments that retard job growth and economic growth. His head screwed on right, most definitely in terms of North Korea, understands that strength, peace through strength is better than marching off to foreign wars. My real problem, Alex, is that the high number of Bush alum, headed by H.R. McMaster and Dina Habib Powell, and particularly in the White House Economic Policy Council shop, are hardcore pro-NAFTA, pro-neocon, pro-Iraq war Bushies, and they unilaterally have found a way to, I think, mislead the president. We were supposed to be out of that.
And so we're getting a lot done thanks to his instincts. But when he's trying to pull from the swamp to make his government, he's being infiltrated at every turn, which means we've got to be vigilant. We've got to be focused.
Look, you got to support him when he's right, which is most of the time. You got to point out where his orders and his policies are being countermanded by a Bush-commanded bureaucracy out to undo what he wants done. I think he's doing extraordinarily well on the big picture stuff.
Let me get back to this briefly with you. What do you make of Mueller, now that he's discredited, involved with the Russians, Hillary discredited again, back to the Podestas, shutting down their lobbying firm? I mean, what does that signal, or does Mueller just roll forward despite the fact that he's basically, been caught in bed with Putin?
Look, I think Tony Podesta probably isn't guilty of that many crimes. If he's indicted for failure to file for the Ukrainian party he was represented, this crime is easily remedied by filing. He did file late, but he filed. And no one has ever been, to our knowledge, actually prosecuted for this. And if they were, it would be, generally speaking, a $5,000 fine, and they slap on the wrist.
It's the same thing they're going after Manafort, so it's a political stunt.
It's window dressing. It's the way Robert Mueller convinces us, look, I'm bipartisan, I'm going after a big Democrat. Now, here's the problem. John Podesta told the Senate Intelligence Committee he knew nothing about the Fusion GPS, so-called dirty dossier.
That's the real crime, is the perjury on Fusion GPS.
And it appears that he was lying now that we know that he met with a Fusion GPS official who is talking to the government. So I think it is reasonable to say that John Podesta's time in the barrel may be about to come.
But not for what we're hearing about. All right, Roger Stone. We can only follow you on Twitter at Stone Cold Truth because they've banned Roger Stone off of there. You've got a lawsuit ongoing. So we'll talk to you again coming up this week during the weekday transmission.
No, I was very pleased to say that I asked Judge Andrew Napolitano to review the first draft of my lawsuit against Twitter, which has come from my team of terrific lawyers, and he really believes it's a 10-strike. He believes it's an extraordinary case for free speech.
All right, we'll talk to you soon. Coming up, Christmas banned in TV ads in the U.S. and UK. I'm not joking. And Paris cancels Christmas market. I can't play all of it right now, but I'm going to play part of it right now. Mass public temper tantrum caught on camera. Paul Joseph Watson. Then I'm going to come back and get to Christmas literally under attack like never before. I used to hear this 15 years ago and thought it was some right-wing fiction. It's far from fiction. It's happening now in ridiculous spectacle. Let's go to Paul Watson.
Laughing at deranged social justice warriors is so 2016. I mean, it's just such low-hanging fruit. It's so cliched at this point.
Tonight, thousands of people in cities across the country will scream helplessly at the sky 1 year after the election of President Donald Trump.
All right, then, one more time.
3, 2, 1.
But I was thinking, this reminds me of something. What could it be?
Shout out his name.
Reenacting the 2 minutes of hate out of 1984. You're literally Orwellian. We're dealing with the daycare generation. Why do you think college safe spaces now have crayons and puppies to cuddle? We're dealing with infants who learned that screaming was how you got your own way. Well, this is the adult world, snowflakes, and things just don't work like that. Oh, that sweet taste of liberal tears. Tell a lie, it's not sweet, it's... What's that taste? Salty. But I've got to say, I was looking forward to this immeasurably. And you kind of let me down. I mean, you had lower energy than Jeb Bush on a debate stage. Someone forgot to take their brain force. In Austin, our own Owen Schroyer screamed for longer than the actual protesters.
I'll get it kicked off here.
A handful of them turned up for 10 minutes and left.
And, excuse me, ma'am. What are you doing? Excuse me. Excuse me, why are you blocking our free speech? Got some sort of aquamarine character here. He's got a old school, like, type of a diver's scuba mask on or something here. And then he's got a homemade sort of megaphone here that he's putting into a stuffed turtle's mouth. This is actually happening. This is actually happening.
We're going to be back on the other side of this break. This is just like in colleges. Veritas has videos, at least 3 colleges I've seen, where people see constitutions and people handing out constitutions, and they get so triggered, they go cry and they hand out Play-Doh, crayons, and then kids sit at little tables and draw while adults do. This is the Arrested Development mental illness, like confronted by freedom, go into your shell. Yes, be a victim. This is all a joke. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's old Willie Nelson and Merle Haggard bringing us in with Poncho and Lefty. Out of kindness, I suppose. All right, let's get into the serious news here right now. I want to explain something. I'm not a bully. And so when I see a weak person or a mentally retarded person or a handicapped person, I don't think, hey, that's an old lady in a wheelchair going out to her car. Let me go beat her up. She's an easy target. Or there's a mentally retarded 12-year-old. Let me steal their lunch money from them. But that's how the globalists operate. And I'm not anti-Muslim. I was against the Iraq War. Part 1 in 1991 and 2003. I was against both of those. And I studied the topics. I knew that they were putting radicals in charge, getting rid of moderates. It was all part of a larger setup to take control of the region, very cold-blooded, very immoral. Then I saw Obama come in 9 years ago, and I heard he was this Islamic operative. He was involved with the Muslim Brotherhood, and he had this plan for this big Arab Spring and the takeover of the Middle East and Africa and the killing of non-radical Muslims and Christians and this global takeover and to flood Europe with George Soros and all this. And I thought, man, this must not be true. That's so evil. There's no way that's real. And then I sat back about 2-3 years into it, and I watched it happen. And I had the CIA whistleblowers on, Colonel Schaefer and Tosh Plumlee and many people behind the scenes. And they said, we're giving heavy weapons to the most radical jihadists that kill every woman, man, child, priest, non-radical Muslim. They're killing everybody, and our government's backing it. And we were the tip of the spear. I'm so proud of that, exposing it. Wow, what a time to be alive. And then I saw George Soros with hundreds of boats a day out of Libya, bringing the radical Muslims he'd brought in from all over the world into Libya, into Europe, and having the EU and the UN give them passcodes and give them passports and let them come in. 80% of the immigrants, military-age men. That was the words of the EU itself. And Interpol. Turned out it was way more than that. It was like 95% military-age men. And I pulled back and I went, wow. And then I got articles where the Muslims will go to a pet show in Germany and start raping horses. Pooping in pools. They're banning Oktoberfest all over Germany. First saw it 3 years ago. Now it's nationwide because the Muslims break the bottles of beer and just flip out and beat everybody up. It triggers them to suicide bomb. And I'm like, listen here, I'm not giving up my way of life and what I do and freedom and the ability to not drink beer or go outside at night, or a woman wear a miniskirt or not wear a miniskirt, because we brought in a bunch of crazy people out of the Middle East and North Africa with the big bankers and Nazi collaborators backing it. Guess what? I'm not putting up with this. And here it is up on InfoWars.com. But it links to mainstream German news with a straight face. Listen to this. Christmas commercial, British and Germany. Christmas commercial by grocery chain features Muslims, Sikhs, but no Christians. And you watch this by the #1 UK, #2 company in Germany. You watch the Tesco UK-based supermarket chain with a Christmas ad with gay families with little kids they've taken with CPS, and Muslims, but no Christians, no crosses, and it tells you where they are. But you think, oh, that's just a Dan Lyman article, InfoWars.com. Here's the voice of Europe. Paris cancels Christmas market, holds special Ramadan party every year instead. And it gets worse. This is the program. Because they know we're open, free society type folks. And so they just sell us on going along with whatever the establishment says. So we're like, okay, we won't have Oktoberfest, we won't have Christmas, we won't hand out Christmas cards at school. Oh, but the schools in the U.S. and in the U.K. and in Germany and in Sweden, they take the children to the mosque, search engine it, and have them pray to Allah. And they let the Islamic men who see little girls as animals if they're not wearing a hood and owned by some other man and escorted by a man, that means they're their property. Women can't even go outside, but that's okay. Because Linda Sarsour and George Soros of the Democratic Party said it was sexy. It's just crazy. Coming back, we're going to look at the attack on Christianity, the attack on the family, the attack on basic survival of the species, and the Islamic attacks that are going on as well. But there's no doubt the globalists are just cold-blooded people that want to conquer society and rule personally in their lifetimes. And if they got to ally with authoritarian, radical, Orthodox Islam to take over, they'll do it. And if they've got to overrun everything, they'll do it. The good news is humanity's awake, and we are rejecting their whole program. We're saying no to their whole program, and good things are happening, and that's why I'm here. That's why I'm so excited. That's why I am so excited in you and what you're doing and our great crew, because amazing things are happening. You know, we've played the congressional hearings just a week and a half ago where they said their main mission, Twitter, Google, Facebook, is to shut us down. And the reason they're doing that is because they know we're awake. When you spread the links to the articles or the video links or the live show links on Twitter, Facebook, Google, prisonplanet.tv, when you share the links at InfoWars.com/show, this isn't talk. It's not like we're some group up here saying, hey, we're engaging the globalists. We're in a war for the heart and soul of humanity. We're exposing the corporate takeover. Support us. We're winning. We're really doing that. Coming up, the next segment, SNL rips into the Democrats and admits they're a fraud. We're at that crest moment, and we're only one focal point of your vision, your awakening, that we're all punching through together, but we're in this together. So there's no doubt when I say financially supporting InfoWars, praying for us, most importantly, spreading the links, that is changing the world. We need your blessing. We need you to direct God our way to support us. We need you to financially support us. We need you to realize that God's given us a chance right now. And despite the fact that we're humble and we're ragtag, and Lord knows I got my problems, we have been risen up and anointed in this fight against the New World Order, and we need your prayers and your secondary support, because what two people agree on earth is done in heaven. When the people are connected to God, it's insurmountable. So we need those prayers, number one, spread the links, spread the articles, and financially to provision us to defeat the enemy. We're not backing down one way or the other. I'm a missile going into the target no matter what happens. But I want the full engine burst, the full Mach 10 to deliver my payload and go through the armor of the enemy and blow up on the inside. That's all I want. Everybody knows it. The enemy knows it. They can't stand the fact I'm not afraid. They can't stand the fact that even threatening to take my children hasn't affected me. They can't stand that they've done everything, because I know this is like 10 seconds, this life. Eternity is what matters. InfoWarsStore.com. Free shipping's about to end. 50% off of most of our best-selling products. T-shirts, you name it. Just commit today. Go there, get the products, InfoWarsStore.com, and give us a smidgen of your energy financially to commit to what you've done spiritually, and we'll change the world. Coming up, 3 powerful segments straight ahead, jam-packed, they don't want you to see. So spread the links, InfoWars.com. For more than 22 years on air, I've exposed to the listeners the fact that everything the globalists do is upside-down world. Everything they do is inverted. Well, coming up in the final segment, here in about 30 minutes, I'm going to give my review of Stranger Things, very well-done television show that is laced with propaganda and anti-human garbage. So that's coming up. Darren McBreen is with me right now. Great talk show host, researcher, InfoWars fellow. And Darren, I wanted to, in the next segment, get into what's happening with the entire Democratic Party turning against Hillary and turning against Bill Clinton. And obviously they're not doing that because they're angels. They're doing it because they know it isn't working. The public is awakening.
If she was president right now, they wouldn't be doing it.
Exactly. So we're going to, in the next segment, get into the final canary in the coal mine. Saturday Night Live coming out saying, you're too old, you're arrogant, you're corrupt, you're out of control, we want you to be destroyed. And then Donna Brazile comes on as an actress and says, I'm going to bring you all down. I'm going to blow this up, which is exactly what smart elements of the Democratic Party are doing. But I know they're evil and sociopathic, so I want them to keep being so obvious. But at the same time, it only vindicates everything we've been talking about the last few months.
True.
I mean, are we not? Next month's news today?
Next year's month, or next year's news. I mean, you've talked about stuff that we don't hear about until 5-10 years later. But, you know, they are imploding so bad. I didn't tell you about this. I was harassed over the weekend on Facebook by some people that not even friends of mine, but they went on my Facebook and they're trying to tell me how InfoWars is, now we're the mainstream. We're part of the mainstream. We're no better than Fox News. And I'm just...
But those are paid groups. They go, they gang up, they target everybody that works here, seeing the weak link.
Yeah, well, and they're trying to harass me, and I try not to get into any arguments with those guys, but I thought about it, and I thought, you know, is Fox News... I mean, we are being attacked. Twitter censors us. They're talking about InfoWars in congressional hearings right now. How to stop InfoWars is basically the topic that's going on right now.
Because we just want basic freedom. But that's the thing. We know Soros is spending hundreds of millions just on InfoWars, funding campaigns that target all our crew, go after people, try to turn them, offer them money. But, of course, you never even get it. They're just there to use you and destroy you. And, again, what are they so afraid of? We have a memory. Gruber said, thank God the public has no memory. Thank God they're so stupid. We can screw them over with Obamacare. They just don't like the fact that InfoWars, like Drudge, will show you something they said 5 years ago versus today. We're not that smart. We just have a memory.
Well, like Zuckerberg calls his, you know, everybody that's on Facebook dumb effers.
He calls people that trust me are dumb effers.
That's right. And don't forget, it was Zuckerberg.
And now Parker, the former president, goes public saying we're preying on people.
That's right.
We're hurting people.
Zuckerberg, remember, it was a couple years ago at a UN conference. It was
last year. He told Merkel, he said, I'm going to spy on the people.
On a hot mic. Well, she said, hey, what are you going to do about this anti-Muslim rhetoric if people post anti-Muslim, anti-immigration posts on their Facebook? What are you going to do about that? And he says, hey, we're taking care of it. You know, hot mic. And
it started a month later.
CNBC reported that.
So ahead of our breakdown of Saturday Night Live turning against him, a key bellwether, a key canary in the coal mine, and then ahead of my Stranger Things review, and this is a loyal opposition review. I mean, it's a good show. It's just that it tells you what's going on with the CIA and real government programs that happen, but it makes it entertainment that doesn't tell you there's a whole literal leftist foundations, Ford Foundation, Carnegie Endowment script that's public. I mean, they admit the script is in all the major media that's corporate. And so I'm telling you, this is a CIA program. It's coming up here in the last segment. But first, we're going to play this clip of Angel Soft that aired a few years ago, just par for the course of anti-fathers. Ahead of this clip I'm going to play from Stranger Things, where it's all anti-father, anti-nuclear family to control you and break you down. Doesn't mean nuclear families are perfect. Doesn't mean there's problems. They're attacking the strongest thing statistically there is. Don't have a nuclear family, 3 times more likely to be in prison. 4 times more likely to be on drugs. They know what they're doing. So it's biological. But here it is. Father's Day ad pulled, too political to praise dads. That's this year mainstream news. But first, I want to get into this ad. Father's Day, mom emotional ad, thanks moms. And this is a ad put up by Angel Soft. And the same NFL game, they did this, 4 other ads on Father's Day against fathers. Mother's Day is for mothers. We love mothers. Okay? I love my mom probably more than my dad, okay? But the point is that dads get to have their day, not, no, it's too political. This year, they won't run pro-dad ads. I've got mainstream news I'm going to show you. Just like mother and father are getting banned, you know, by the whole movement. So here is a clip of what is being run against fathers.
What do you need? My father passed away when I was 3. There was 4 of us kids within 5 years. So my mom had to raise 4 kids by herself.
My mom was
and they're saying a celebration of dads hurts moms. Or saying you have a mother and father hurts people that don't, who are whatever.
Very emotional.
I'm sorry.
And it's a whole ad thanking moms on Father's Day.
I don't know how she raised 3 boys on her own with such grace.
Again, dad being recognized hurts women?
Seen her try to juggle both mom, dad, and, you know, everything else that she had to do for herself.
This is like they targeted the black communities. You know what I mean?
Get the dads out.
Yep, get the dads out. They're doing the same thing to everyone now.
She was not a joke.
Well, the CIA ran the modern feminist movement.
Oh, well, that's the alternate.
They know without a father figure,
Put your knuckle out.
It's over.
It's a breakdown.
It's biological. Imagine saying
I don't even know if that's
male whales can't be involved, or male chipmunks.
Her toughness, it was something very fragile.
All right, let's stop right there. So they ran all these anti-father ads on Father's Day to see what would happen. It blew up in their face.
And this is the norm, by the way, Alex, on just like all your...
Dad's a fat idiot. He's a drunk. He's a moron. It's every program.
Every sitcom.
They don't debate this, but the point is it's declassified. Now, here it is. Herald Sun. This is a U.S. ad that ran here this year. They tried to air it during their national soccer, they call football championship. It was banned. Herald Sun, Father's Day ad pulled, too political to praise dads. So let us show you the ad that's too political, that's so evil that it praises how great dads are and how great moms are. Here it is.
Little baby, don't you cry. Daddy's gonna sing you a lullaby. When you're
Men and women together with a baby, the humans. It's like aliens make these ads. This is what's bad. This is what's banned. A father loving his child. The image of a father being good. We all did this. It doesn't take from mothers that fathers are good.
You know, this was part of the Communist Manifesto.
Is to end the family.
Yep.
Look at North Korea has basically done it.
Yep.
You've got to undermine men. And all those experiences of fathers with their daughters. And the father at the prom taking his daughter in. Or rubbing his baby's feet. Yep. This is our human experiences. And the sick freaks running things say this is dirty, this is bad, and we're rejecting it. And the good news is, let's recognize we're rejecting it as a human community. The fake racism, the race baiting they push, the name of anti-racism, the sexism, the classism. We have all been on a journey together. We have been through rough times together, but we are together. We are we love our grandfathers, our grandmothers. We love our fathers, our mothers. We love everyone. The fact that we love mothers and fathers and families doesn't mean we're bad to other people they've hit with chemical weapons.
That's why they call it television programming.
That's right. Darren McBreen with me. More straight ahead. We're getting into Saturday Night Live and the rats leaving the sinking ship straight ahead. And then we're going to get into Stranger Things and an analysis that I shot at my house in my garage working out yesterday. It's all coming up. Spread the word. Be part of the revolution. They're trying to stop us. Sunday, the 12th day of November 2017. Alex Jones here. The final 2 segments with my good friend, an amazing political researcher and graphics expert and talk show host, Darren McBreen. I've already talked about it earlier, but I don't just say things to make them self-fulfilling prophecies. I say things when they're evident. We told you the Democratic Party's turning on itself. It's imploding. We led the way. Drudge Report linked to our articles weeks ago, noticing what was already happening. Talk show host, Donna Brazile, head of the DNC, Chris Hayes, Wolf Blitzer, saying the Clintons are bad news, hurt the Democratic Party. They finally figured out what we know, the globalism, the corruption. Listen, I hope the Democrats reform themselves and get back to populism and free market and prosperity. I'm not against Democrats or Republicans. I'm against the Democrats because they became so selfish and inwardly focused and, you know, so Kim Jong-un-like or basically Stalinistic. But we've got the big news here, ladies and gentlemen, since this dam broke in the last few weeks. Saturday Night Live, the big bellwether, the canary in the coal mine that killed its ratings going after Trump and all their lies and calling me racist with no proof. Alec Baldwin, Alex Jones, very racist, got it from him. All of that now suddenly turning against the Democrats. We're going to play the clip in a moment. Darren, what do you make of this?
I think it's exciting to see, but we knew this was going to happen. They have to stay relevant, so they can't just be anti-Trump all the time. It's killing their ratings. But I've always said, especially since Trump has been elected, a lot of people, unfortunately, they get their news, and their news source is from late-night television. That's where they get...
You've been saying that for the 7 years you've been here in InfoWars. Alex, we got to focus more on entertainment. That's where they're hitting us. And I'm like, I'll cover the news. But you're right. We've got to watch this and keep track of it because that's where the propaganda is.
And people like that. They like to escape. And these guys are funny. I'll admit, a lot of...
And I do too. But why won't they let us escape?
Well, it's part of the establishment, and we know the media is part of the establishment. They use the media to help control the narrative.
And so what does it mean they've thrown their full weight behind propaganda in entertainment shows, comedy shows, late shows? What does it mean that more and more the Democrats are turning against Hillary? I think it signifies indictments, and everything they said about Trump on Russia is about to happen to them.
Absolutely. Like I said, they have to somehow stay relevant if they can, because they're losing power. They're losing, I mean, a lot of people, they're losing influence is what...
I agree. So suddenly in the last 2 weeks, why are all the Democrats in their entertainment shows suddenly, who were like cult-like followers of Hillary and Bill, why are they suddenly turning on them? What do they know?
Well, they know what's coming out. There's a lot of stuff that's coming out. But even Donna Brazile, and I do credit her for coming out and exposing the Hillary campaign, but she's not gone far enough. I mean, her book is still called Hacking. She's still...
She's covering her butt.
She's covering her own ass. That's what's going on. But look...
You've got a stack of articles there. Give us some of those headlines. I'm going to play this piece that we're going to analyze here and critique.
This one is pretty huge. I don't think you've seen this one yet. But the Huffington Post, they just yanked an article about Russiagate. This was a couple days ago. It was only up there for 24 hours. But the guy that wrote this, he is an award-winning journalist and UN correspondent for 25 years. His name is George Loria. Loria, I think that's how you pronounce his name. But he talked about Russiagate, and this article only lasted, like I said, for 24 hours.
And they pulled it. I saw it. I saw it today because it showed that basically it was Hillary.
Yes, it showed that it was Hillary. And check this out. The two sources that originated the allegations claiming that Russia meddled in the 2016 election, they were both paid for by the DNC and the Clinton campaign.
And what's incredible is... You've got real journalists that can post around and tell the truth about this. They get shut down, which creates the Streisand effect. But let's expand on that. The fact that in this piece you're about to see from Saturday Night Live that Donna Brazile's the hero, again, shows how desperate they've gotten. Here's part of that Saturday Night Live piece that aired last night.
And now a message from the Democratic National Committee.
This Tuesday, Americans went to the polls.
And they told President Trump, we don't like what you're doing at all, sir.
And now one thing is clear. We're back, baby. The Dems are back.
Estamos de vuelta.
You love us again.
And we haven't felt this confidence since the...
Back this up. Darren, everything they say here is what we talked about, how they really only won 2 Democrat states. They already won last election. They're imploding. They're delusional. They should be gotten rid of. I mean, it's literally word for word what Roger Stone and I and you and others talked about last week. They're now saying it.
And how they stole the primary from Bernie Sanders.
Which is true, but again, and how Seth Rich was killed politically. Let's continue.
You love us again.
And we haven't felt this confidence since the day before Trump won.
You love our fresh new ideas delivered by fresh new faces like me, Nancy Pelosi.
And me, Dianne Feinstein.
And me, Chuck Schumer.
Y yo soy Tim Kaine.
And I'm team player Donna Brazile.
And we also have some great new leaders waiting in the wings, like hot young thing Elizabeth Warren. And also, that's right,
It's Biden time. And I'm still around too.
And together, we're going to end the spirit of divisiveness in this country by focusing on how we won the governor's races in 2 of the 10 states we care about.
And we learned our lesson from the last election. We can't just appeal to coastal elites. We need mouth breathers from Wisconsin.
And window lickers from Ohio as well.
And we know that what Americans really care about is jobs.
Jobs like smuggling immigrants across the border
And converting Confederate monuments into statues of prominent lesbian poets.
This is them realizing they totally lost the
They're gonna
public.
listen to people if they don't say what's politically correct. Like these comics out there who think it's okay to make jokes about concentration camps. That guy should rot in hell.
The Dems are back. And we won't stop now because we need another path for our country.
Another vision for America. Another chance for me, Hillary Rodham Clinton. Just one more chance. And maybe one more chance after that.
That it's destroyed them. They finally woke up. Way too late. They should have known back during the campaign.
I wouldn't get too used to this as well. I think they're still going to use their normal format. I just think they're being forced to at least try and have a little bit of
course.
Fair, fair and balanced.
Here's the key.
Yo soy Tim Kaine.
And just wait till Bernie transfers his base of passionate millennial voters over to a new leader.
No, if you liked it, you should have put a ring on it. Pass.
So watch out, America. Because the Dems are back. We're back.
We're back, baby.
Cuidado, Senor Trump.
Because the Dems are back.
I will destroy all of this.
This ad was paid for by Mark Cuban for the Republican Party.
So what they're pushing is, this came out this week, Mark Cuban's going to try to take Trump out in the next primary in 2.5 years. And this is all the inside baseball, but this is their facelift. They're desperately trying to get the face sucker, the Clintons, out of there because it's killing them, literally killing their party. Not just saying that, it's the end of the Democratic Party.
A lot of these skits end up on social media, so that'll be on YouTube and it'll be on Facebook later. And I predict that will be one of their most viewed. You know, because this is the thing. They want you to believe that Donald Trump as, what, like a 30% approval rating?
Just like during the campaign, it's about 65.
Yeah, it's totally ridiculous. So
it's 65 with voters. It's about 50 with non-voters.
Yeah, so when they start doing more of this conservative type
it's like 57
of comedy,
total.
they're going to get a lot more views, and they're going to get a better reaction. I mean, most people, America is not full of libtards, right?
Well, I mean, let's expand on that.
There's a lot of them out there. Don't get me wrong. I'm saying the majority of people are patriotic Americans.
Well, also Trump, 10 months in, 11 months in, is delivering on the economy and everything else. So they've got a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
They've got a big problem. When we come back, though, I'm going to be honest with everybody. I want to see the Democrats continue on being so idiotic in the public so we beat them. But we've got the Republican Party as well we've got to face. But the fact that they're finally waking up that no one's buying their BS means they'll finally be a harder opponent to beat because they're going to go back to lying more efficiently, not just selling their whole New World Order program. I'm going to come right back on the other side with Darren McGreen to break down the more sophisticated program out there, the brainwashing that's hidden inside entertainment. Stay with us. When I told folks 10 years ago that Facebook was there to create artificial systems of government surveillance between you and your friends was meant to make you depressed, it was because I'd already read government documents involved in the planning of social networks in the 1960s at MIT. We'd had CIA whistleblowers on, like Steve Pachinik, a psychiatrist, but also whistleblowers behind the scenes I'd talked to. But my father himself also worked on those systems in the 1960s and 70s. So I was told about that a long time ago. The point is that the main propaganda is inside television shows and entertainment. The globalists know they've lost the fight for control of the mainstream news. They know they've lost control. So it's in sports that they put the politics in, NFL. You wake up to that, they go bankrupt. And now it's in great art films, great shows like Stranger Things. It's really well done, that it's just laced. And one layer of this is the anti-family, anti-father. I waited till I was 6 episodes in. Watched the 6th today, watched the 5th yesterday. It's all anti-family. It is definitely anti-family, McBreen. And we just showed earlier all the TV ads against the family, against fathers. Dads are slobs, dads are evil. I mean, it's so overt. Once people are looking for it, it's ridiculous.
Once you're looking for it, you can see it. It's real subtle. But if you look for it, it's right there in front of your face. And I was talking earlier about the Communist Manifesto. That's one of the things in the Communist Manifesto is to break down the family unit. And this is a subtle way of doing it. It basically just makes it uncool to have the nuclear family.
And again, we get in cookie-cutter America, there's been problems. But it plays on your emotions as if family did this. Well, if you think family screwed you over, you wait till the system. It doesn't give a damn about you. They're trying to take away the one group, and it's in all the countless government documents. The communists in the Soviet Union, but especially North Korea, as you mentioned earlier, they get rid of the family. So let's go ahead and air, and this is total fair use. I'm going to assume they try to claim copyright. This is a public program. I paid for this. I watched it. I'm a citizen. Free speech. I am reviewing this to give you critiques. Also, the girls are all anorexic in it. Plus, the 13-year-old girl who was 12 when they shot it, they're calling her the sexiest woman alive.
Sexiest woman in Hollywood. Sexiest woman in Hollywood.
Can we pull that up when we come back after this clip? I mean, there's so many layers, but here's the deal. They admit MKUltra. They admit mind control. They admit drugging women and children. They admit trying to torture people till they become psychic or express their powers. And that's all real, but it becomes a joke. So, oh, you learned about that on Stranger Things. There it is. The magazine called Millie Bobby Brown one of the sexiest TV stars. And honestly, what the F? She's 13 years old. The sexualization of children. Here is our breakdown of Stranger Things, episode 5, season 1. Okay, this is the #1 TV show in the world, as most of you know right now. So I decided to go ahead and watch the first season, Stranger Things. Great cinematography, great cast. Okay, really good. But then you know that there are written rules in Hollywood and quotas that every film must attack the nuclear family, every show. This is admitted. And that every leading role must be a heroine, must be a woman. So I'm sitting here watching this while I'm on the elliptical, and the theme is families having dinner together is bad. In the previous episodes, it's all foreshadowing. The father's deadbeat and has run off from the house that has the interdimensional gate broken, and there's Winona Ryder, his ex-wife. They're fighting. He was never a good dad. She was the mom that was good. Dad's bad. So earlier, they'd stolen a gun his son had out of his car to go fight the interdimensional monster. And by the time I even saw this, I said, oh, next. They've got the gun. The guy won't know how to shoot it, but the girl will. Sure enough, it happened. But then it got even worse. It went further. They then actually talked crap about the nuclear family on top of it. Now, again, I didn't predict this. It's total scripting, just like Gamergate and all the rest of it. This is incredible that it's just all laced in here. And look, I'm all for women being heroes in movies. The point is, it's every hero in every movie now. And it's all admitted a formula of total control. And this is what America is rejecting. So go ahead and watch the scene right here.
Cool. Oh, don't do that. Do what?
I'm not lying to you.
Yeah, well, where does he want to go? Huh? What? Where does Jonathan want to go to college?
He gets that money anywhere he damn well pleases.
NYU, Lonnie! He's wanted to go to NYU since he was 6 years old!
So then he goes to NYU!
Get out.
They also lace into all shows the dream of going to college, because they know it's a giant scam and literally a fraud to debilitate people and basically brainwash them and put them into guilds. That's all declassified too. Just like Ugly Art's whole CIA. But so this is a show about the CIA, about mind control, but it's mind control.
You need me here, Joyce.
I have not needed you for a long time.
Oh, no?
Yes, you don't need a man, don't need a nuclear family. It's bad, it's nasty. But again, they spell it out in a minute. Again, they know your way to mind control, globalism, shadow government. So now they have a show about that to hit you with their propaganda.
Look what happened.
Don't you dare! At least I was here!
Oh, come on, Joyce. Just look around this place. All your Christmas lights. How am I supposed to think you're such a great mom? You're a mess.
Maybe I am a mess. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm out of my mind. But God help me, I will keep these lights up until the day I die. If I think there's a chance that Will's still out there. Now, get out! Get out!
Again. And I knew the girl would walk up and shoot the cans. But then they go further, actually bad-mouthing, screw the nuclear family.
You're supposed to hit the cans, right?
Oh, how predictable.
No, actually, you see the spaces in between the cans? I'm aiming for those. You ever shot a gun before? My dad took me hunting on my birthday. Made me kill a rabbit.
A rabbit?
Yeah. I guess he thought it would make me into more of a man or something.
So you're wondering, how do they have them shooting a gun? because they're going to badmouth hunting and fathers again. I mean, my God. They must have given the person that wrote this particular episode a bonus for this. And how stupid do they think you are? So again, more attacking Dad.
Who's Dad's thumper?
I met your dad.
Yeah. I guess he and my mother loved each other at some point, but I wasn't around for that part. Yeah.
Oh.
Just, friendship.
It's so condescending.
I don't think my parents ever loved each other.
We'll see.
Must have married for some reason.
See?
My mom was young. My dad was older, but he had a cushy job.
Don't get married. Just marry the state.
Came from a good family.
He's really well endowed.
They bought a nice house at the end of the cul-de-sac.
State will inject you with cancer.
Started their nuclear family.
Unified propaganda. She fires, she's on target.
Screw that.
Screw that. There you go, ladies and gentlemen, and I could sit there by the millisecond and show you the propaganda, and it's all like that. Not just the overt NFL stuff. The globalists hate our families, they hate our strength, they hate Christians, and
look,
everything
film select
they
is
do.
a pentagram with Baphomet's eyes.
Great art pieces like the show is very well done. It's laced with absolute brainwashing.
Everything.
Oh, yeah.
The entire time.
Subliminal
programming. Where the head CIA mind-controlled DARPA guy has like Trump hairstyle, was totally white. I mean, it's all effing white male. Go to hell.
I was thinking, Nancy Wheeler, she's not just another suburban girl who thinks she's rebelling by doing exactly what every other suburban girl does until that phase passes and they marry some boring one-time job who now works sales and they live out a perfectly boring little life at the end of a cul-de-sac, exactly like their parents.
See, they're taking your economy away, so you'll be homeless, and they make it cool to be poor.
Now again, I'm not selling the cookie-cutter program. But that's the artificial system that's actually made everybody
humans organized together. They can't beat us.
So then, just like the Facebook documents show, they keep you alone and depressed. And so they make it cool for you to get deeper into your depression and not find other humans you love and work with. Then it puts the artificial stresses into family to make it cool, too.
Trump's breaking a metaphysical deal.
You understand? And again, it's all declassified, folks. That's what we're talking about. This is a real program about brainwashing and about children being tortured. And it's all been declassified. It's all really going on. They even talk about MK Ultra in here, but then it makes it entertainment. So when I talk about it, the news makes it a big joke.
Making it come back. People are waking up, Alex. That's the good
government program. And it's all
this is the Stranger Things.
Hollywood, the CIA for yourself.
Anti-family, anti-male. Women are strong, men are weak, and above all else, Christianity is not the answer.
And it trains women to turn against their men. Then the man's gone, the state comes in, the family's broken, the control's there, the depopulation. That's it for this transmission. David Nights at 8 a.m. tomorrow. I'm back at 11 a.m. Central. Thank you.
Austin, Texas, broadcasting worldwide.
All right, folks, spread the word.
It's Alex Jones.
It certainly is. Thank you all for your support. God bless you all. We really appreciate you. We're in a true fight. We recognize the humanity's awakening. What a time to be alive right now. Thank you, Darren.
If you are receiving this transmission, you are the resistance. Live from the InfoWars.com studios, it's Alex Jones.
I can't play all of it.
Hi everybody, Stefan Molyneux from Free Domain Radio, here with the Reverend C.L. Bryant. He is the host of the C.L. Bryant Show, founding member of the American Voice PAC, senior fellow at Freedom Works, and the host of the powerful documentary Runaway Slave from Tyranny to Liberty. You can check him out at the C.L. Bryant, BRYANT show.com, and twitter.com/Rev CL Bryant. CL, thank you so much for taking the time today.
I'm really glad to be on with you, and thank you so much for having me.
Now, you seem to have missed the memo, and I don't mean, of course, to tell you about the black experience in America, but you seem to have missed the memo that come from the Democrats. And the memo runs something like this. It's all racism all the time. That is the only problem faced by blacks. They apparently seem helpless to fix their own situation without the outside Democrats riding in to save the day. Did you see that memo? Do you disagree with that memo? What's your perspective?
I saw that memo most of my life. I grew up in the segregated South. I am the former president of the NAACP, Garland, Texas, 25 years ago. And that memo was one that, of course, for 60 years, black people did, in fact, hear from the Democrat Party. And so I have seen both sides of this street, like a person who's eaten hamburger and who's eaten filet mignon. If you of a certain taste, you know that filet mignon is better. And so, at least for me. And so conservatism and the conservative principles of this country, when I've eaten of the liberal experience, I found that the conservative agenda was much better for who I was as a black man in this country.
Now, it seems to me that the black community should have some reasonable affinity with conservatism because, of course, having seen the family shattered under slavery, having seen, you know, Jim Crow and segregation and so on, the need for community, and, of course, Christianity, which is quite a conservative-friendly, if not conservative-centered, religious approach. Where do you think the deviation has occurred in the black community, leading them more towards the left, leading them more towards Democrats, and away from community, family, and Christian roots?
It was the idea that we're all the same. Back in the 60s, there was a move toward us getting an equal share, a level playing field, an equal outcome, and all of that type of thing was indeed the message to the black community. And when you start thinking that you're the same as the person next to you, and quite frankly, the experience for quite some time was the same. Most black people were financially in the same boat, but all people, regardless of color of your skin, are different. They're diverse. Families are different. But once you start marching to the sound and acting to the actions or reacting to the same actions of the same drummer, then you are able to create a monolith. And our vote became monolithic. And because of that, it was not optimal for us at all. The Democrats took us for granted, and the Republicans didn't care. And so that is where we got off. With our core, black people are conservative. Black people love Jesus, just to say that. We are Christians. And there are certain social values now that our grandparents see us embracing, or if they were alive, could see us embracing, that they would certainly wonder why this is a trend that we have gone to instead of the type of ideals and moral codes that they themselves adhere to.
This is one of the great frustrations, of course, of people who look at various groups within America and say, okay, well, in the post-Second World War period, you know, blacks fought in the Second World War. You got the GI Bill, which got a lot of education. There was a renaissance. There was more blacks moving into the middle class than at any time before in American history. And this upward progress, this updraft towards greater equality and equity, it seems to me kind of like the 60s turned that around. It kind of plowed it under, whether it was the welfare state, whether, I don't know, whether the sort of increasing co-opting of black causes by leftists. I don't know exactly what it was. I'm sure you have some insights, but it seems like things were, for once, heading in the right direction, and it didn't seem to last more than 10 or 15 years before things turned back to a negative direction.
Let me share this with you. I speak across this country. I crisscross this nation once a month, almost every month, speaking at various events throughout the nation. And there's something that I include in my presentation that I want to share with your audience, and that is this. During the early 70s, there came a movement to make them laugh, make America laugh. And they created certain characters and shows that were designed to do that. But in a way, it was diabolical, and I'll give you an idea of what happened. You remember All in the Family, The Good Times with J.J., Dinah Kid, Dynamite Walker, The Jeffersons, Pico and the Man, and those types of shows. All of them were good, and as far as entertainment was concerned, but there was a message to Black America and to America itself in those shows. I'll take the Jeffersons, for instance. There you had George Jefferson, an upwardly mobile Black man, worked his way out of the ghetto, and he moved on up to the east side to that deluxe apartment in the sky.
Don't put that song in my head, man. I saw it growing up. I get that song in my head. I won't be able to concentrate on anything else for the rest of the conversation, but go ahead.
And so there he was in the apartment in the sky. Now, he was still angry. Who was he angry with? He was angry at the stereotype that we were painting of Archie Bunker. And the names that he was calling Archie indicated that he was still angry at him, even though he had managed by the sweat of his brow and the work of his hand to pull himself out of that type of situation. Now, on the other hand, you have J.J. Walker, a happy-go-lucky kid in the inner city of Chicago. Black kids began to emulate that all of them should have the type of persona that J.J. Walker had. And even Black men who have made it were being programmed to think that they should still be angry at the white man because George Jefferson was. We had an opportunity right after Dr. King's death to, as you were saying, break out of that type of thinking. We had an opportunity to become like the Irishman, to become like the Italian. We had that opportunity, but we were herded into a corral, and we were fed this message that if we don't do this together, if we don't all succeed together, then we're not going to succeed at all. And that has been the mantra of the Democrat Party, that you become our mascots, and we'll make sure that all of your boats rise together. That is a diabolical plot that they have played on Black people then, and they're still playing it on them now.
And it's a funny thing too, CL, because when I grew up, the Black friends that I had, they were pretty conservative. I mean, more conservative than I was in my youth. They came sort of stable two-parent households. Their parents were professionals. They had nice houses. They, you know, one of them was like the head saxophone player in the school band, and great, and one of the most popular kids in my school. And it's funny because my initial experience of hanging out with Black friends was that they were pretty conservative and religious and solid and stable, middle-class values and so on. I didn't get this sort of seething anger stuff. We would talk about race from time to time, but it was sort of a more incidental subject. And then when I got older, the Black voices that come in through the mainstream media seem to almost purposefully exclude those kinds of voices as what? Not radical enough, not angry enough, not divisive enough, not whatever. But there is a great deal of silence, a sort of blackout silence, so to speak, from conservative Black voices in the media, which is really frustrating because they're there and they've got wonderful things to say, like yourself.
The reason you don't hear the story of Frederick Douglass, the reason you don't see an epic movie about Frederick Douglass is because he's not Black enough for this particular experience that we live in America today. And Black people, for whatever reason, don't realize that there's large portions, successful portions of our past history that are not recognized by the progressive liberal media. And Frederick Douglass is one of them. He was an escaped slave, of course, and he died what by today's standards would be a multimillionaire. And most people don't realize that, but they don't ever address the fact that we never talk about Douglass. We never talk about Frederick Douglass. Nat Turner, yeah. Frederick Douglass.
Well, that's the divide in some of the Black intellectuals, which is around, are we going to try and fix our own communities and sort of arise by hard effort, hard work? You know, if we start from a disadvantage, well, that just means we have to work harder and be better and so on. That's sort of the one example. And the other is, you know, are you going to get your resources from trading in the free market, from developing your human capital, from being an entrepreneur, or are you going to get your resources from creating this edifice of white racism and then demanding that the government give you resources as compensation? And I think these two divides divides are really creating big splits, not just within the black community, but within American communities as a whole.
One of the things, and you definitely alluded to it right then, one of the things that we forget also, my grandfather was an illiterate man. He would not have been able to read his name on my name on the back of his wall if he was still alive. In fact, he was the first CL. And that comes from him not being able to spell, so he gave all the boy children initials for names. And it's a great story behind it. But anyway, there was no affirmative action for this illiterate man. But he used his skills as a woodcutter to start a pulpwood cutting business. And that's for the paper mill. He was able to buy trucks, 3 of them. He hired 15 men. Now, all of this was back in the days before affirmative action. All of this was back when if it didn't rain, the crops were not going to come in. And if you didn't work hard, you were not going to eat. What I think black people have forgotten is that we are the people who have survived slavery. We were not victims. We are victors. But the progressive liberals have actually made victims of people who have as a legacy of their existence in this country victorious stories. And we don't tell those stories. We just want to dwell and roll around in the ideas of what they did to us, not in the ideas of how we overcame all of that through hard work and perseverance, just like the Irish, just like the Italians, just like anyone else in this country. We have survived it, but we don't tell that story.
Well, that would give, of course, a kind of pride and a resilience that would make dependence on government programs a violation of that very pride and resilience and that dangling of free stuff in the face of not just blacks, but various communities. You know, here, give us your vote, we'll give you free stuff. I mean, that decays families, that decays neighborhoods, that decays the work ethic, and I think triggers women to choose less productive and honorable men to be the fathers of their children because they're guaranteed resources from the state, so they can, they can indulge in shallow lust rather than looking for quality of character for a provider for their children.
And it leads to a form of slavery. And what progressive liberals have found is that the slave does not necessarily seek freedom. The slave seeks comfort, a softer bed to lay on, more food in its bowl, a roof that doesn't leak, an Obama phone. If in fact you provide the comfort, the slave sometimes is very much content with remaining in the slavery if you just make it easier for him to be a slave. And that's what progressive liberalism has done, as you have described, with the black woman and the black man in modern day America. And America doesn't realize that there was a time with the attitudes that our grandparents and great-grandparents had. They actually had moments when the black marriage rate was higher than the white marriage rate. There was a time when it was an absolute disgrace for your child as a black family to go to jail or be found to be a drug addict. That was an absolute disgrace. Why? Because you were not being a credit to the race. That was actually a living, breathing statement when I was growing up in segregated schools. We want you to become a credit to the race. You don't even hear that anymore. In fact, that may actually be insulting to some who might hear that. And the word colored, we're very happy with being called people of color, but we don't want to hear the word colored. That is actually something that is absolutely insane.
And reading the stories of how black communities used to function in 20s, 30s, and 40s, when of course racism was more of a potent force in society, there was certainly less pushback against it. Reading Dr. Thomas Sowell's last column before he retired, where he was talking about, he went to visit a Harlem school not too long ago, and, there's metal detectors, bars on the windows, and so on. And he says, oh, yeah, it was really hot. We used to sleep out on our balconies. We used to sleep out on our front porch. We used to sleep out on the roof when it was really hot. And people are like, what are you, crazy? And he was talking about, oh yeah, that park over there, that's where I used to play when I was a kid. And the kids were all like, play when you were a kid? You go over there, you get stabbed in the eyeball by a junkie. Like, how much and how rapidly and how catastrophically, and it's not just the black community, Lord knows the white community is going the same way as far as unwed motherhood goes, but this decay and collapse of formerly highly functional, as you point out, more functional than a lot of white communities, highly functional communities, in less than a century, have been reduced to these war zones.
It has. And the pride of ownership, the pride of community is no longer there. I'm 61 years old, and I was 9 years old, 9 years old in 64, 65, when the Civil Rights legislation was passed. I have actually drank from the colored and white water fountains. And I got to tell you, the water in both of them is the same. I used to drink from the white water fountains purposely just to see what the big deal was. And there is none. There is no big deal. Riding on the back of the bus, I remember what that was about. Being called the N-word by people who know how to say it and the intent behind saying it in those times. It was truly to be dehumanizing, not out of anger, but there was an intent behind it. The same type of intent, I might add, that rappers, gangster rappers, use in their music today. There is an intent behind what they are saying, and it's very much the same intent that was used toward black people by white folks back in the day. It's being used by progressive liberals in that way. Now, my whole point in saying that is that there has been a design to actually diminish womanhood and the black male. Among the black male, especially when you look at the evil, in my view and in my discipline, of abortion. It diminishes life. And if you cannot respect life inside the womb, then life outside the womb, walking down the streets of Chicago, is absolutely meaningless as well.
And that is an astonishing fact, CL, that I remember reading that a black baby conceived in the womb in modern day America, this year 2017, has only a 50-50 chance of being born. That we got a 50% abortion rate, 50% killing unborn children in the womb. Now, I don't care what your views are on abortion, well, I kind of do, but the point is, there is no sane person in the universe, no matter what your views on abortion, who thinks that is a good situation, that is a fine place for a community to be. And this callousness towards the unborn. I mean, we have it in general in society. We burden everyone, all the unborn, with national debts because we're too greedy to pay the taxes for all the goodies we want to vote for. But this visceral destruction of life in the womb, 50% chance, that is truly astonishing and not much talked about.
Let's take it a step further. Black folks are only 13% of the population, well, 12.7% of the population in this country. Abortion of black babies is 43% in this country. How is it possible that we're so upside down in that figure if there was not some type of design in that heinous practice? How is it possible that black men, who are only 6.5% of the population in America, account for nearly 60% of all the violent crimes in this country? What has happened here? And how come we have football players kneeling and denigrating police officers who many times can't go into the black community and help out that poor black mother or grandparent who's trapped in a situation where they are held hostage to the black criminal in his own community? How come we're not protesting that, but we're protesting the arbiters of law and order in those communities? There is something that has been perpetrated a design that has been perpetrated upon the black community that they themselves have bought so deeply into. It is like a Stockholm syndrome victim, that when the liberators come to take them away, and you mentioned Dr. Thomas Sowell, he's in my film. He and Andrew Breitbart are in my film. When we come to liberate them, we're actually the enemy, because the identity now is not with the liberators, it's with the captives.
This issue, I think, is something that is one of the great heartbreaking issues of the modern time, which is that when you look at black crime rates, and of course, you know, I mean, if you're going to talk about, you know, 50, 60% of the violent crime, we're really talking about a subsection of young black men. You know, it's really 2 or 3% of the population. I mean, it's not like people your age are doing a lot of that kind of stuff, or my age for that matter. And so this has become one of the great tragedies, which is, you know, when I was growing up, you know, I saw blacks in ties going to work and having great conversations and being interested. And just look at the music, too. I mean, the music is a whole big deal. One of my favorite singers is Sam Cooke. The guy came from a gospel tradition, Sam Cooke and the Soul Stirrers and so on, and brought, you know, beauty and grace and great powerful lyrics and uplifting messages and so on. And this has kind of devolved now into, you know, you got, you know, 50 Cent rapping about some god-awful thing, and it really does kind of toxicify the culture. And now black crime, young black male crime, is to such a degree and such an extent that people, I think, have statistically legitimate concerns, legitimate fears. And it's now, because if everyone's acting the same, then prejudice, of course, is bigotry and racism. But if you have a group of people who are acting significantly differently and more dangerously, my concern is that reinforces people's fears. And they say, well, statistically, I have reason to fear. What was it? Jesse Jackson, who said, after 20 years of trying to heal race relations, I hear footsteps behind me on a street. I turn around and I'm relieved if it's white people, if it's not black people. That is, now the data is coming into the point where people can say, well, there's reason to be afraid. And how tragic and how horrifying a missed opportunity is that?
Sure it is. I've been preaching the gospel now for 40 years in this country. Came in on the heels of Dr. King. My parents were civil rights activists. In fact, when Dr. King spoke at my home church here in Shreveport, Louisiana, Galilee Baptist Church, back in 1959, I was only 3-4 years old, but I was there with my mother that night. And don't remember it, but I do remember the type of people that were there. They were very serious people. And every black person, black male model in my life, including my father, they had some type of job. That was the example that I had. Even if it was being the yard man or whatever, they had a job. What I'm saying is there was a time when the gospel of the church and the gospel of America was very much in tune to one another. Dr. King was one who was able to carry both of those gospels to a black community. I do my very best to emulate his method when I am on the road and when I am speaking. If you get a chance, just Google some of the speeches that I have done. Of course, I'm me. That was Dr. King was Dr. King, but the idea of letting folks know just how great not only your God is, but how great a country your God has given you to take advantage of is a very important thing that black people are missing in this relationship that we should have with the greatest nation on the face of the earth and the greatest success story the world has ever known, not realizing that we have it by birthright, this type of opportunity. Jamaicans come here and are very prosperous. Nigerians come here and are very prosperous. How is it that those of us, in my case, who have been here since the 1700s, don't take the same advantage of people with the same skin color? How is it that a Kenyan like Barack Obama can become president of the United States, but Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton get it twisted? How is it possible that that happened? That is where we're off track. We don't understand the gospel of America.
When either as a group or as individuals, when we have suffered under great wrong, when that wrong is at least to some degree cured or addressed or ameliorated, there is to me a fork in the road. There's a great temptation. If someone has done me great wrong and then works to ameliorate that wrong, then I can look deep in the rear view at all of the black, nasty, ugly things that have happened in history. And I can stare at that until my heart turns cold and my tongue turns bitter. Or I can say, well, this was a great evil. I can either stare at it and be consumed by it, or I can celebrate its reduction and move forward productively and positively into the future. And we've all had them. My ancestors were enslaved. I'm half Irish. They happen to be enslaved by Muslims. Now that ended up not being the case after a certain amount of time. And we can either celebrate the progress that we're all making, or we can sit there and be consumed by staring into this black maw of history, this ugly side of history, and say, that's where we're going to stay. That's where we're going to focus. And then you become, in a sense, consumed by the past instead of beating a clearer path to the future.
What you have just shared with us is also something that I do share across this nation, and that is the history of mankind is a story of human tragedy. There is no question about that, regardless of what your skin color is. And you are a part of, and by the Bryant is actually my name. That's a whole nother story, but I too am a quarter, a little bit better, maybe a third Scots-Irish myself. And so when we look at the progress that the Irish made, and I alluded to the Italians as well, they didn't do it. I wouldn't look at you. Let's just say that you were a Democrat, or a progressive liberal Democrat, and I was full Irish myself. I wouldn't call you an evil Irishman because you're a Republican. But that is what happens in the Democrat Party, or with the black race. Black people think that I'm evil because I happen to be a black conservative or a black Republican, not realizing that the diversity is the strength. I think the Irish understand this. The Italians understand this. The diversity in the race is the strength, but the monolith becomes something that can become very much disposed of.
I was really struck, CL, when you were talking about your father. And I think we should spend a few minutes talking about fatherlessness. Again, we can focus on the black community, where we have north of 70% of kids being born out of wedlock. The white community, it's cooking up around 30%, of course, and heading up. It's high in the Hispanic communities as well. So it is not solely a black problem. I myself grew up without a father, and it takes a long time to find your feet if you grow up without a father as a man. You need the role model, you need the instruction, you need a way for your natural aggressive enthusiasms as a boy to be channeled into productive outlets, so that you are not violent, you are rather energetic and committed to some humane or civilized cause. What is going on with, in your travels and talking to various communities, what is going on with this fatherlessness stuff? Is it really recognized as powerful an influence as it is? I mean, one of the big statistics that really struck me was that if you normalize for single motherhood, in other words, if you take that into account when you're looking at statistics, the black-white disparity in crime almost disappears. Now, whether that's coincidental or causal is complicated, but to me, it is one of the greatest tragedies and one of the very hardest to reverse.
When you are surrounded as a male, and with too much estrogen and not enough testosterone, there is an imbalance that happens there. That's what's happening throughout America. I applaud every single mother who raised her child without that man being there. And I applaud every man who stepped up to the plate and became a father to a child that was not his by natural birth. But this is the thing that, and I think it is a part of the, the blending of the genders and the story that's being told of the unisex move in this country. We must understand that there is a certain design that was given, as I believe, by the creator of the universe, that there are roles, none subservient to the other, but roles that are important to the other. And when we forget the purpose of someone or something, then abuse of that someone or something is inevitable. And so we are now witnessing the forgotten purpose of why we have different genders, why we do have them to promote the race of humanity. And we have forgotten that there are, in fact, consequences for forgetting the purpose of who we are and what we are as male and female, regardless of your politics on it. The common sense in it is that there must be some type of, let's just say, cosmic design, if not spiritual, in their being male and female. One without the other does not produce a healthy society.
Right. So let's talk about some of the perspectives or ideas or approaches that people can start to think about in terms of trying to turn some of this stuff around, repairing communities, repairing families, repairing race relations. Because, you know, you bring up the Irish is a great point. You know, I've talked on this show about IQ differences between blacks and whites. There were, of course, IQ differences between Irish and non-Irish way back in the day. They found to be ways to close that through better education, through, you know, better families and so on. So what is it that when you go around, and I can't recommend your speeches highly enough, man, the fact that you're not rhyming is just killing me. It's killing me. It's killing me, man. I'm robbed forever. But it's fantastic. The passion and the clarity that you bring to your speeches, I can only envy and perhaps someday hope to emulate. But what is it that people can start to think of in terms of the way forward to try and deal with some of these issues?
Telling the truth about the story, and then studying. Americans in particular, white, black, all of us, are very ignorant as far as what we consume. And that's not to be condescending to anyone. It's just a fact. If you want to hide money, put it in a book. Nobody opens books anymore. You'll Google something. You know, you'll Google it. And kids have this instant access. And I'm not saying that I'm against, I mean, of course, I have all this stuff here. I showed you the other day the type of setups that I have here in my home. Couldn't even figure out how to talk to you the other day, you know, as far as that was concerned. So I have all these gadgets, and we're governed by that. But the fact of the matter is, when you actually crack open a book, you have to take the time to actually turn that over, what you're reading, in your mind. I think we have a society now that is fed a narrative, purposely in some cases, and without reading the author for yourself. The amazing thing is your mind, your creative mind, cannot paint that picture for you. But when you Google it, when you look at it like that, you have an instant note of how it is supposed to be, or what they think you should think it is. But when you hear radio, when you listen to programs like we're on right now, when you read a book, the creative mind begins to paint that picture for itself. So to tell the story, tell true story. The Republican Party doesn't tell their story. Most kids will think that Abraham Lincoln was a Democrat. You know, most kids, you know, that he would have to be, couldn't possibly have been a Republican and freed the slaves. There's just no way. They don't know that the first congressmen and black congressmen and senators to both houses were black, were Republicans. They don't know that Carol Moseley Braun was the first Democrat senator elected in the Democrat Party. And the second one that the Democrat Party ever elected was Barack Obama. They don't know that. And so Republicans are the evil ones, but the Democrats are the ones with the history of oppression in this country. That is the absolute truth.
Yeah, people still think that the KKK has something to do with the Republican Party when it was the terrorist arm of the Democrats. And it is this rewriting or misquoting of history You know, we are not, you know, sovereign, independent entities that somehow have a connection to perfect knowledge. We are shaped by the narratives we are fed. Our beliefs and therefore our emotions and our passions are very much dependent on the changing winds of the stories that we hear. And if the stories are lies, you know, we build our church, so to speak, on sand rather than rock. And the communication of truth is essential to the reduction of tensions. If we can meet in reality, if we can meet in truth, then we can celebrate where we are rather than use stories and narratives as weapons to cut each other down, to divide, to antagonize, the end of which I scarcely shudder to look at the path that could take America and the world as a whole.
When Thomas Jefferson told us in our founding document, the Declaration of Independence, that we are endowed with certain unalienable rights given to us by our Creator, I don't know whose face, what color that face was that he may have had in his mind when he penned those words. But I can tell you this. The day that he penned those words, he guaranteed that the day would come when the son of Irish immigrants and the son of former slaves would be having this conversation in a free America. He guaranteed, that old white man guaranteed that that day would come. And let us celebrate that. Let us tell the story of how we evolved from that to where we are. Because we can always unscab the sores that are trying to heal in this nation. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're unscabbing those sores that are trying to heal. And that's for a purpose as well. Because as long as we are having to put salve on that, and the progressive liberals are the ones administering that salve, then they keep the slave, as I told you, in a state of looking to them for comfort. Slave does not necessarily seek freedom. Slave seeks comfort from its pain and perhaps even its humiliation. And that's where we should be. That's where we should be headed. But unfortunately, I think we're headed towards civil war in this nation.
Well, of course, I hope that conversations like this can do our level best to attempt to reduce tensions. I really, really want to thank you, Reverend Bryant, today. Please, everybody, check out the website, the CL Bryant, that's Bryant, clbryantshow.com. We'll put the links to all of this below. You can follow the good Reverend on twitter.com/Rev CL Bryant. Thank you so much, CL. It was a great pleasure to chat today. I hope we can do it again.
God bless you and keep you. I'll have you on my show soon.
Yeah, it can be kind of painful to see things for what they are, but it is important to see things for what they are. New York Times just put out an article called "Can My Children Be Friends with White People?" That is some tasty race baiting NYT, and I don't know if we've hit peak New York Times or not yet, or peak racism yet, but looks like we're getting close to the summit as it stands. First of all, of course, can you imagine a white person saying, "Can my children be friends with black people or Jewish people or, I mean, God, Hindus?" I mean, the double standard, of course, is becoming boringly predictable and ridiculous. And the article goes a little something like this. First of all, it starts with what has become kind of like a leftist cliche, which is, well, my son saw Donald Trump on the television and screamed like it was something coming through another portal dimension on Stranger Things. I had to comfort him extensively. The writer says, my oldest son, wrestling with a 4-year-old's happy struggles, is trying to clarify how many people can be his best friend. My best friends are you and Mama and my brother and... But even a child's joy is not immune to this ominous political period. This summer's images of violence in Charlottesville, Virginia prompted an array of questions. Well, I guess one of my first questions is, why is your child seeing images of violence from Charlottesville, Virginia? He's 4. That's not a G-rated news story, for God's sakes. That's my first question. Just be straight up with you. Well, I've got a lot more questions to come, but that's my first one. The writer says, in explaining, I guess, some questions about Charlottesville, some people hate others because they are different, I offer lamely. A childish but distinct panic enters his voice, but I'm not different. Okay, people don't hate other people because they're different. Hey, you know who's different? Kobe Bryant. You know who else is different? A quarterback in the NFL. You know who else is different? Cher, Taylor Swift, Nicki Minaj, people with significant performing ability. Very, very different. They're not hated. Hate people because they're different? No.
Salutations.
So this, I don't know how to explain how evil white people are to my 4-year-old child. Not an argument. He goes on to say, it is impossible to convey the mixture of heartbreak and fear I feel for him. Donald Trump's election has made it clear that I will teach my boys the lesson generations old, one that I, for the most part, nearly escaped. I will teach them to be cautious. I will teach them suspicion, and I will teach them distrust. Much sooner than I thought I would. I will have to disclose with my boys, I will have to discuss with my boys whether they can truly be friends with white people. Distrust, caution, suspicion. I must teach them to be afraid of white people. Now, it is kind of a one-sided conversation. And I'm invited, and perhaps fools rush in where angels fear to tread. I am invited, like everyone, to have an honest conversation about race. So, I'm going to have an honest conversation about race. Because, of course, everybody asks, minorities in particular, oh, what's it like? What's it like? What's it like? I don't know that a lot of people ask, like a lot of people ask white people, what is it like? Frankly, it's not a lot of fun. It's not a huge amount of fun being blamed for every conceivable social ill because whiteness, while at the same time being lectured to about how racism is just so terrible. White people are the worst people in the world. But racism is really, really bad. You understand? There's lack of reciprocity. You know, it's kind of like how when there was a migrant crisis, Saudi Arabia leapt into action and committed an enormous amount of money to build 200 mosques in Germany. Now, if you are Christians in Europe, good luck trying to get 200 Christian churches built in Saudi Arabia. See, kind of like a one-way street going on there. So this idea that it's really, really important to be terrified of white people, and that's just the conversation that you have to have? I don't know. I'm kind of a big fan of facts. Big fan of facts. And everybody knows that blacks commit an unbelievable, if not downright ungodly amount of crime. Now, of course, the argument is, well, it's just racial bias in arrests, and they're targeted and so on. No, the overwhelming evidence is that that is not the case. See, if blacks are arrested more, let's say 25% more in a certain area, well, you interview the victims and you find out what was the race of who was attacking them or raping them or whatever, right? Assaulting them. And if the victims report the same proportion of blacks or whites or Hispanics as are being arrested by the cops, well, then it's accurate. And witness and victim surveys say, yeah, police arrest violent criminals fairly close, very close in proportion to the rates at which various races commit violent crimes. Because there are massive differences in crime rates. So Asians, and in particular Orientals, very, very low in terms of criminality. Higher than that are whites. Higher than that are Hispanics. And way higher than that in general are blacks. And this is pretty much the same for just about all categories of crime, and it's not concentrated in any particular age group and so on. Just to get a sense, this is numbers from 2013. A black was 6 times more likely than a non-black to commit murder. 12 times more likely, blacks 12 times more likely to murder someone of another race than to be murdered by someone of another race. 12. 2013, there were about 660,000 interracial violent crimes, just involving blacks and whites. And of these 660,000 violent crimes between blacks and whites, blacks were the perpetrators 85% of the time. So, just to boil it down to you, this means, give or take, a black person was about 27 times more likely to attack a white person than a white person was to attack a black person. With regards to Hispanic, or mestizo, about 8 times more likely to attack a white person than a white person attacking a Hispanic. Now remember, the arrest ratios track very closely to crime victimization surveys, witness reports and so on. Look at 2014. A black is 31 times more likely than a white to be arrested for murder. Hispanic was 12.4. Now if you look at this crime called shooting, this is a firing a bullet that hits someone, a black is almost 100 times more likely than a white to be arrested. Hispanic, 23.6 times more likely. When it comes to rape, well, black on white rape is quite considerable. White on black rape, virtually non-existent. And so the idea that, you know, it's really, really important to teach your black kids that white people are enormously, overwhelmingly dangerous. Well, let's just say there's a certain amount of pushback from the data on that hypothesis. So that is kind of important to understand. The writer goes on to say, meaningful friendship is not just a feeling, it is not simply being able to share a beer. Real friendship is impossible without the ability to trust others, without knowing that your well-being is important to them. The desire to create, maintain, or wield power over others destroys the possibility of friendship. So, since the 1960s, about $22 trillion has been poured into solving the problem of poverty, which was in fact being solved by the free market largely before the 1960s, which we'll get to in a sec. About $22 trillion poured into solving the problem of poverty. I think that may be considered, however perhaps misguided, an attempt to solve the problem. Just a possibility. Now, the desire to wield power over others, well, I don't know. Let's say that you're out there and you basically make the statement that unless whites vote for Democrats, they're racist and you can't be friends with them. Would that be, say, the desire to wield power over others by applying one of the worst labels in American history, the label of racist, against people who don't agree with you politically? Is that potentially, just possibly, an example of trying to wield power over others? I think it could be. It could be the case. So, the writer goes on to say, history has provided little reason for people of color to trust white people in this way. And these recent months have put in the starkest relief the contempt with which the country measures the value of racial minorities. America is no, we'll get into that. So this racial minorities thing, Jews are a minority in America, and Orientals, East Asians, Hindus are all minorities, but they all do better than white people for the most part. And so I'm not sure what racial minorities means. The East Asians, like Chinese and Japanese and Koreans and so on, make substantially more than white people in this supposedly white-dominated, patriarchal, white privileged society. So I don't know what it means by racial minorities. It's the great invisible Orientals. It's the great invisible Asians in this. So the value of racial minorities, such as East Asians, is higher than white people in the supposedly white privileged society. So I don't know what that means, other than, well, we'll get to that. So he goes on to say, America is transfixed on the opioid epidemic among white Americans, who often get hooked after being overprescribed painkillers, while studies show that doctors underprescribe pain medication for African Americans. But when black lives were struck by addiction, we cordoned off minority communities with the police and threw away an entire generation of black and Hispanic men. So I think what he's referring to here is in the 90s, there was the crack epidemic, and this started in the 80s, but there was a significant increase in the sentencing and incarceration of people involved in the drug trade in particular. And this, interestingly enough, was first begged for by people within black communities in America, who the societies were crumbling and crime was running rampant, so they ran to the state to ask for help. And as it turns out, Bill Clinton, a Democrat who was voted for overwhelmingly by the black community on 2 separate presidential bids, Bill Clinton was the president who presided over the largest increase in federal and state prison inmates of any president throughout any portion of American history. Bill Clinton supported this 100-to-1 sentencing disparity for crack cocaine versus powder cocaine, so that meant that if you were caught with an ounce of crack, it was considered to be equivalent to 100 ounces of cocaine, and this, of course, was disproportionate. Well, it was not disproportionate to the crimes being committed, but it did significantly affect poor blacks. And so Republicans bringing Donald Trump into a law that was to some degree begged for by black communities and enforced by a president who was enormously popular in the black community. Don't worry, white people. I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh. Don't worry, white people. It's still your fault. It's still your fault because stuff and guilt. Getting to hit that white guilt button yet? I'm getting any resources from you? I don't know. So he goes on to say, likewise, despite centuries of exclusion and robust evidence of continuing racism, minority underemployment is often couched in the language of bad choices and personal responsibility. When systemic joblessness strikes swaths of white America, we get an entire presidential campaign centered on globalization's impact on the white working class. Well, first of all, in any racial group, in any gender group, some people are not working because they're lazy and they make bad choices. However, I will certainly say this, that globalization's impact on the white working class, come on, man. Ugh. I mean, how far from empirical data do you have to be? Let me just give you the 411 on this. Okay. Massive third world immigration is extremely destructive on low-wage workers, of which there are a lot of blacks, for reasons of, to some degree, historical injustices, to some degree because of culture, and to some degree because of the bell curve, right? There's sort of different IQs in various groups in society. But when you have massive waves of third world immigration crashing into America, it drives down the wages for the most vulnerable in society. Now, which party is responsible for switching for turning immigration back on? The tsunami immigration was fairly non-existent from the 1920s until the mid-1960s. Then Ted Kennedy, hint, Democrat who actually killed a girl. He opened up the floodgates to third world immigration. That was a Democrat. And it was a Democrat policy who has been fighting massive third world immigration, who has been trying to construct a border along the southern part of the United States, trying to construct a wall. Well, it's the Republicans. So the fact that blacks overwhelmingly vote for Democrats, and Democrats overwhelmingly import workers that directly compete with blacks and drive down their wages, I think you've got a lot to thank for the Republicans for trying to control some of this endless amnesty waves and so on. So, again, some basic facts. Anyone with half a brain has been trying to help and save the black working class from third world immigration, but unfortunately, blacks and of course other groups continue to vote for Democrats who continue to import more people from the third world, thus driving down the wages of blacks, which makes welfare more attractive and destroys the black community in many, many cases. He goes on to say, even the nerve of some rich or visible African Americans to protest that America, in its laws and its police, has rarely been just to all, has been met with the howls of a president who cannot tolerate that the lucky and the uppity do not stay in their place. Well, you know, in one of the few methodologies of closing the black-white achievement gap has been to use charter schools, has been to use schools where the parents have more control. So that has been an almost exclusively right-wing or Republican goal. The left wing, of course, is so dependent on union dues from public sector workers and teachers in particular that they will almost never countenance and will directly be violent against people who try to get this kind of stuff overturned and have local communities have more control over their schools. So the idea that the left is some sort of friend of the inner city, you see these Waiting for Superman movies where people are like hysterically lining up and trying to get their kids into semi-private schools and out of the hellhole of government schools, and the idea that the left is against these kinds of schools that can really help black kids and poor blacks, and is vigorously defending these brain-destroying propaganda mills and violent centers of the government schools. I mean, come on. Come on. This is crazy. Like, this is general thesis. It is a thesis that goes something like this.
How is this tree
All
escaped corruption?
Gaps between Orientals and blacks are due to racism. All gaps between Jews and blacks are due to racism. All gaps between whites and blacks are due to racism. Now, of course, it's always white racism. Of course, right? But that's the thesis. It's just racism. Now, that thesis has certainly been central to government planning for, well, longer than I've been alive. So well north of half a century. And compared to what was happening before the government started pumping $22 trillion into the poor, and a lot of it went, of course, to black communities, there was the free market that had a significant amount of opportunity to deal with the problem of black poverty. Now, the free market, between 1940 and 1960, black poverty had been cut nearly in half. Nearly in half. So you want to go back to a time where black poverty was being reduced, where more and more and more, in fact, the most blacks in American history were vaulting up into the middle class. And when black families were relatively stable, and when black communities were relatively prosperous and productive, and when there was hope and a future and a possibility for the black community, you'd want to go back. Now, you have to go back before the welfare state. You kind of have to go back between the 1940s and the early to mid-1960s. You get black poverty cut nearly in half in nearly 20 years. If you go back just a little bit further, but then go back a little further on the end date, 1936 to 1959. In various skilled trades, the incomes of blacks relative to whites have more than doubled. Doubled. I mean, if you care about blacks and their opportunities, then you have to really oppose the unions a lot of times, and all of these barrier to entries, like a third of Americans now need government permission to have a job or have a profession. because the unions and all of these, you know, you got to apprentice for 7 years and all of this stuff was, you know, a lot of it was designed to keep blacks from out-competing whites in terms of accepting lower pay and thus increasing demand for blacks and increasing their pay. Then, of course, in the 1960s, you get the welfare state. And the welfare state specifically penalized women who had husbands. So now it's gotten to the point, and it was very quickly after the welfare state came into play, that if you're a woman on welfare and you get married to a man who has a low-paying job, I mean, you lose thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars worth of benefits. It's taxed at more than 100%. You get a couple of bucks of extra pay, and you lose thousands of dollars in benefits. Right? That's worse than being taxed at 100%. That's being taxed at hundreds or thousands of percent. And so the two things that you need to do to get out of poverty, well, I guess there are three things. I mean, the first is finish high school. The second is get and keep a job for at least a year. And the third is don't have kids out of wedlock. So, but basically marriage and work, the incentives were both destroyed under the welfare state. Because a woman was penalized for marriage and a man was penalized for working. And what does this mean?
I don't like it.
Well, this means that in the black community since the mid-1960s, there's been a tripling of out-of-wedlock births. See, in 1940, black families there was only 15% illegitimacy in black families. Only 15% of children being born out of wedlock. Now, it's 75%. Back then, 15%. Now, that's really, really important. Because we all know, if you're raised in a single-mother household, it's an environmental toxin, frankly. Right? All boobs, no penis, environmental toxin when it comes to being raised. In general, there are some exceptions. But much higher chances of criminality, of promiscuity, of STDs, of drunkenness, of criminality, I mean, and of being abused. Not to mention the fact that of all of the ethnic groups in America, blacks hit their children the most, and aggressively. So, and I had a communication from a black guy who was telling me that his family used to sit him in a warm bath to soften up his skin for the whooping. The whole time he's sitting there, he knows what's coming. So, given that we've gone in, less than 80 years, from 15% illegitimacy in black families to 75% almost illegitimacy, are people going to say that there was less racism around in 1940? Well, there was more, I would assume, according to the theory. In 1950, only 9% of black families were headed by single moms. In 1950, black women were more likely to be married than white women were. So those numbers have gotten much, much worse. It's almost like that 22 trillion might have been just a little bit misspent in terms of incentives. Or maybe the saying about Lyndon Johnson, the Democrat who was behind the welfare state, when he said, or is supposed to have said, that he's going to get those blacks voting Democrat for 200 years. Well, maybe it was the reliable voting base is getting away into the middle class. Let's go trap them with the soft, sticky undertow of the welfare state and keep them dependent on us. The writer goes on to say, as against our gauzy national hopes, I will teach my boys to have profound doubts that friendship with white people is possible. When they ask, I will teach my sons that their beautiful hue is a fault line. Spare me platitudes of how we are all the same on the inside. I first have to keep my boys safe. And so I will teach them, before the world shows them this particular brand of rending, violent, often fatal betrayal. Now, what is conspicuously absent here is any policy analysis, data, or arguments. This is almost pure, distilled, semi-brain-rotting sophistry. There's no arguments here at all. Just general fear, petulance, despair, anger, resentment, manipulation. There's no facts, no data here. That's just important to understand. It's important to understand. What's the purpose? Right. If you have an argument and you don't bring any facts or reason or evidence to bear, it's because you have a goal which you don't want to discuss openly. He goes on to say, of course, the rise of this president has broken bonds on all sides, but for people of color, the stakes are different. Imagining we can now be friends across this political line is asking us to ignore our safety and that of our children, to abandon personal regard and self-worth. Only white people can cordon off Mr. Trump's political meaning, ignore the unpleasantness from a position of safety. His election and the year that has followed have fixed the awful thought in my mind, too familiar to black Americans. You can't trust these people. I guess what he means is you can't trust white people. You can't trust white people. Can't be friends with them. It's fatal, violent, sinister, disastrous to be friends with white people. Can't trust white people.
It is an honor to serve you.
You know, this kind of, I mean, let's just call it what it is. This kind of virulent racism is, unfortunately, going to summon more racism in return. Of course, right? Because if you're so fundamentally focused on your own in-group preference, and trust me, I don't think this guy is representative of black people as a whole. I don't know what proportion of black people he claims to speak for, or even how many would accept that he is speaking for them. So he's got an in-group preference here, which is pretty much along the left, and he's using the traditional communist trick of inciting racism and race conflict in order to expand the size and power of the state. See, Trump is trying to shrink the size and power of the state, and those people who want to grow it and who wish to cripple the free market so that they can grow the state even more, use racial fault lines to divide people, to set them against each other, and to attempt to get white people. See, white people in general want smaller government. White men in particular, and women who are married to them, want smaller government. And blacks and Hispanics and other third world immigrants and so on, they want bigger government, overwhelmingly. And so this whole question of, well, is it just racism? Well, you know, if you want a smaller government, you are going to be naturally opposed to all groups who want bigger government. And if all of those groups who want bigger government happen to be composed of particular ethnic compositions in general and on average, well, that's the way it plays. You know, I mean, if groups act the same, then judging them differently is prejudice. If groups as a whole, again, not around individuals, but if groups as a whole act vastly differently, then we're in a different situation. So he goes on to say, it is not Mr. Trump himself who has done this. Were it not for our reverence for money, Mr. Trump would be easily recognized as the simple-minded, vulgar, bigoted blowhard he is. Not arguments. Now, there's something that really bothers this guy about Trump. I would assume it's because Trump, again, wants to shrink the state, and when job opportunities open up, then some, you know, hardworking minorities or majorities or whoever are going to start getting on that upward, you know, sprint up escalator mobility to the middle class, and then those who are left behind may be viewed as more problematic in terms of their choices, behaviors, and culture, and ethics, and hardworkiness, or whatever. So, I don't know, any number of things. So he's trying to portray this general negative view of Trump, but there's no actual criticism of policy here. There's no actual criticism of, well, Trump does this, and I don't like this, and Trump does that, and I don't like that. I mean, he's even to the absurd point where he says, well, white people are getting addicted because they're being overprescribed pain-killing medications. And blacks aren't being overprescribed pain-killing medications that lead to debilitating and often fatal addictions. What, you want to be overprescribed like white people so you can have more addictions? Like,
not here.
Those people are ODing a lot more than us. It's racist. Good Lord.
Not here.
Anyway, so he goes on to say,
Not
it is certainly not the neo-Nazis marching on Charlottesville. We have seen
Not
their
here.
type before. Rather, what has truly broken my heart are the ranks of Mr. Trump's many allies and apologists. See, now here's the thing. If you support Trump, you are a racist, I think, according to this guy, with no analysis of policy or anything like that. I mean, if he's got concerns about the war on drugs, and Lord knows any sane person does, what does Trump have to do with that?
Faith, I feel no
I mean, the big expansion of the war on drugs
It is an honor
was under
to
Bill
serve
Clinton.
you.
And when Bill Clinton's wife was running for office, still supported by an overwhelming majority are blacks. So, he goes on to say, for African Americans, race has become a proxy, not just for politics, but also for decency. White faces are swept together, ominous anxiety behind every chance encounter at the airport or a smiling white cashier. If they are not clearly allies, they will seem unsafe to me. I'm scared of murderous white Trump voters? Or I'm just scared of white people because they like Trump? And this is somehow not just like your crazy paranoid experience, but this is what? Are you speaking for all people of color? Like all people of color think that white people who may be Trump voters are not to be trusted, are to be scared of. You must be paranoid of them. They might try and kill you. They might support violence against you. This is so far from a rational, fact-based, reason and evidence-based discourse that, I mean, you're kind of making the case for racists for them. You don't want to do that. He goes on to say, we can still all pretend we are friends. If meaningful civic friendship is impossible, we can make do with mere civility, sharing drinks and watching the game. Indeed, even in Donald Trump's America, I have not given up on being friends with all white people. My bi-ethnic wife, my most trusted friend, understands she is seen as a white woman, even though her brother and father are not. Well, of course, her brother and father are not seen as a white woman because they're men. He goes on to say, among my dearest friends, the wedding party and children's godparents variety, many are white. But these are the friends who have marched in protest, rushed to airports to protest the president's travel ban, people who have shared the risks required by strength and decency. Yeah, so if you support his radical political agenda, then he won't put you in the category of people, of whites, who are his enemies or people not to be trusted. It's kind of like a verbal abuse shakedown. Support my politics, or you're a bad white person who's a racist. It's not an argument. Better get those charter schools in quick. He goes on to say, there is hope, though, implicitly without meaning to. Mr. Trump asks us if this is the best we can do. It falls to us to do better. We cannot agree on our politics, but we can declare that we stand beside one another against cheap attacks and devaluation. That we live together and not simply beside one another in the coming years when my boys ask again their questions about who can be their best friend. I pray for a more hopeful answer. Again, it's not one single policy analysis, not one single piece of data or anything like that. It's just feels and manipulation and sinister portrayals of white people. And this is KKK stuff as far as I'm concerned, as far as toxic levels of racism. It's horrendous. Horrendous. You know, because we have this thesis. As I mentioned before, we have this thesis. It goes back, I think you could argue, a couple hundred years, 200 years or so. Since the abolitionists first began, white, largely European, Christian, men, and some women, but men as a whole, began to advocate for the end of slavery. An institution that had lasted as long as human beings had lasted, tens and tens and tens of thousands of years. About 200 years ago, people, or white people generally, white males, said, let's not do this. And untold, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives, were burnt at the altar of war in order to end worldwide the practice of slavery. Massive amounts of blood and treasure were spent to end the worldwide practice of slavery. I mean, Islam, the Muslims, were far more embedded for far longer in the slave trade, and there are reports that upwards of 100 million blacks from Africa were killed by the Muslims in the slave trade. And the Muslims didn't ride out to end it, and the blacks didn't ride out from Africa to end it. It was white Christian males from Europe and North America who worked very hard to end the slave trade. So naturally, which is the only group that is now blamed for slavery? There is no good deed in this world that goes unpunished. So this thesis is that there are these different groups who have different outcomes in society, and the sole explanation of this. Now, that thesis has been chugging along its way for a couple of hundred years and has really intensified over the last 50. And this article is one of the outcomes of that. You know, for me, if you've been working at something for, say, a half century, and it's kind of getting worse, it may be time to reevaluate the hypothesis. Just possibly. If you go back even further and say, well, about 200 years, people have been working to equalize outcomes based on the theory that inequality results from racism. Always and only and forever. Well, a couple of hundred years, how are we doing? How have race relations? If we put it deep in the rear view, doesn't seem to have happened. So I guess my question is, when do we start reevaluating this question about whether the only reason for disparate outcomes for various groups in society is because of bigotry? The only reason. Well, I think it's high time. I really think it's high time. 200 years we've been working on this hypothesis, 50 years, 60 years, in terms of state power, direct redistributing this state power involving massive infusions of cash into poor black communities, including government schools, including $100 billion funding of the Head Start program specifically designed to reduce the black-white achievement gap. We've got set-aside, we've got federal loan guarantees, direct federal support for black-owned businesses, minority businesses. We've got affirmative action of just about every kind, to the point where there are some universities in America that intentionally and statistically and openly suppress Asian scores and increase black scores to get the right numbers. This has been the hypothesis that this is going to solve all these problems. The war on inequality of outcome has been going on for 50 years, or 60 years, or 200 years, and has burned countless trillions of dollars. And this is the result. Is it crazy to think that we might want to re-examine the hypothesis? Is it insane to think that? Do we just keep doing the same thing and expect it to magically and madly? There are examples. This 20-year period in particular, from 1940 to 1960, and probably a few years into the 60s, when there was no welfare state fundamentally, when there were no crashing waves of third world immigration, the black communities did spectacularly well relative to where they were, and even relative to whites. As I point out, wages in some sectors more than doubled. There's an example of something that actually worked. Not state power, not coercive redistribution, not nagging, not guilting, not sophistry. What actually helped blacks? What actually helped blacks was what actually helps everyone except sophists, namely freedom.
good to see you again.
What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Friday, November 10th, 2017. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open. 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Quick little programming note, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 today with her unique perspective on the world here. So getting right on into it, a lot of stuff going on here, and basically a lot of people are really saying it's time for this Mueller witch hunt to end. Article basically saying it's a big nothing burger, and it continues to be. They got indictments against Manafort and Gates, and apparently now they're talking to Stephen Miller. But again, with all the conflict of interest, with the fact that some of the attorneys on Mueller's team are directly connected to the Uranium One deal, this should have been ended. It never should have been allowed to start, and it is time to bring it to an end and get a real special counsel that's actually going to go where the evidence leads. Somebody like Larry Klayman. Let's get Larry Klayman in there. He's not partisan. He'll go after the corrupt of any party equally. Now, getting on back to Hillary's machinations with the DNC, and apparently a campaign finance attorney was on Tucker Carlson's show last night, basically saying that Hillary Clinton's takeover of the Democratic National Committee before she had been named the nominee violates federal law, and it's a criminal violation. Now, normally, if their party has an incumbent in office, that incumbent is in charge of the party. But when you have a race coming up and there's nobody coming in from the incumbent office, and we'll talk about Joe Biden here in a little bit, the party is supposed to operate impartially and isolated from the two campaigns until the primaries are over and a nominee has been chosen, at which point the custom is that the nominee now basically takes over direction of the political party, and it applies to the Republican Party as well. But the way Hillary did it is definitely a violation, and now there may be yet another sign of corruption going on here, because Clinton had so much control over the Democratic National Committee that she actually moved the Democratic National Committee bank account from Washington up to New York to the very same bank where Hillary's campaign account was located. So Hillary's bank made out from all the fees and everything else going on with that. But it is a violation of federal campaign finance law. Now, there's another article came out of Brass Check, CIA, We're with Hillary. And it basically goes back about how Republican power players and donors, including the intelligence community, loved Hillary, and she was their candidate in 2016. Well, it's not so much that they love her. It's that the Clintons know where all the dead bodies are buried and how they got to be dead bodies. And they also have the goods on the CIA's gun and drug running operation out of Arkansas in the 1980s, part of the Iran-Contra scandal. But there was massive election fraud last year. It was used to defraud Bernie Sanders, and they tried to steal the election away from Donald Trump. And I'm not sure that the Republican Party is all that squeaky clean either. If you remember in the early days of the campaign, how the GOP were just absolutely opposed to Donald Trump. They did not want him either. Now, there's been a new poll out there of voters, and the majority of them say that they believe the primaries were rigged. So the word is getting on out there. Remember, politics is perception. If you have the majority of Americans, the majority of these poll respondents out there saying they believe the primaries are rigged, then you've got a real credibility crisis with the election system as a whole. It needs to be overhauled. We need to get rid of those electronic machines. We need to have voter ID laws. We need to close all these little loopholes that are being used by the election riggers to basically decide our government for us. And that's not the way this country is supposed to be working. Now, a lot of people last year were talking about Joe Biden stepping into the ring and running for president. And it's turned out Joe Biden has come on out and said the reason he chose not to run for president last year is that he was afraid of Hillary's opposition research / propaganda / smear machine. And that was why he stayed out of the race. Now, maybe Biden's got some skeletons in his closet that he didn't want to be brought out into the light, or maybe he was just recognizing that Hillary's so-called opposition research, like the Russian dossier, was just made-up lies. And he just didn't want to deal with that. Now, getting on over to the Podesta group. Remember the Podesta group? And Tony Podesta, the brother of John Podesta, resigned. And now, just a short time later, the CEO of the Podesta group, Kimberly Fritz, is leaving, ostensibly to start her own firm. But it looks like more and more rats are leaving the sinking ship here. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And corruption in the courts is continuing. Basically, Judicial Watch and Cause of Action had sued the Department of Justice and the State Department and the FBI back in 2015, demanding the government recover all of Hillary Clinton's missing emails, saying that she violated open records laws by not preserving her message. But unfortunately, U.S. District Judge James E. Boasberg said that, well, the FBI's done all they can. And they did recover a few emails. And so he basically threw the lawsuit out. And I wonder if he was a Clinton-appointed judge. I mean, after, 30 years since Iran-Contra, much more than that going back to Vietnam when the CIA was bringing heroin into this country, that drug money corruption has spread out to infect almost the entire government here. Remember that judge down in Florida threw out the lawsuit by the Bernie Sanders supporters against the DNC? Was a Clinton-appointed judge. Didn't even look at the merits of the case. So, over in Russia today, they ran a story, Rigged Politics, pointing out that that's what many are saying after Donna Brazil claimed Bernie Sanders was cheated in the primary. But the rigging goes further. And they, too, are pointing out the GOP establishment didn't exactly embrace Trump then or now. And they're asking the question, are both parties at war with themselves? It would certainly seem so. They're badly factionalized. All right, we're going to take a phone call now. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. How you doing?
Doing fine.
Mike, you know who Dick Morris is, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, everybody pretty much. If you watch some of his videos, the last couple, he said that, like basically, you're right. They're loaded with, like, people who, like the CIA is loaded with people that are sympathetic because they, she knows where all the bodies are buried. But it's also, he said that they're loaded with globalists.
Yes.
And they're on board with that agenda. And not only them, but the NSA, the CIA, the DIA for the most part, and the FBI. And I know he also said when John Brennan was in that, John Brennan, of the CIA, he changed the whole structure of the CIA, and yeah, there's good elements in the CIA, but there's a lot of bad apples, Mike. And you know, we go back to that what we both said before. Trump should have cleaned house when he came in, because these people wouldn't have had an opportunity to really do what they're doing. You know, like if you got them out real quick, it would have been harder for them to create this mess. You know, not to say there would still be a mess, but it'd be a lot harder for breaking them up, different floors, get them out. You know, I mean, you got to get them out, Mike. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
It's just going to continue.
You know, and again, my primary criticism of Trump was that he came into the White House as dangerously naive about the reality of Washington, D.C. politics as Jimmy Carter. And Jimmy Carter got blindsided, and so is Donald Trump. And, yeah, his biggest mistake was trying to be magnanimous in victory and saying, everybody, you can keep your old jobs, in the belief that now that he was the boss, they would be loyal to him, and that may be the way it works in business. It's not the way it works in Washington, D.C. Day one of his administration, he should have just given everybody their pink slip, and being an outsider president, he should have brought in more outsiders to run those key positions within the government. Just being inside the Beltway doesn't mean you're the only one qualified to run these jobs. There are very qualified, talented people all across the length and breadth of this land who would do an excellent job. They've got the education and the skills to fit right into those jobs and do a wonderful job, you know, for the American people and for Donald Trump. Like I said, I would love to see Larry Klayman get in there as a special counsel or a special prosecutor going after the Clintons.
But if you look, you know, some of them are in it for the money, but a lot of them are on board because it's a cult, a globalist cult. You know, New World Order. That's why they'll follow Hillary Clinton off a cliff. They would. She can kill 1 million people. Oh, wait, she did. You know, but she can kill 1 million of us right in the United States, and they'd still love her because it's a cult. And I don't think anything is going to change those people's minds. You know, and they're on for the agenda, Mike. Like I said, it's going to be a rough 4 years, Mike. I mean, I don't think he's going to be able to get anything done.
I'm afraid you're absolutely right. And instead of the word cult, let's just call it groupthink. But behind it all, I think that's not the strongest force holding it all together. I think it is this interlocked web of mutual blackmail that keeps everybody marching in the same direction, even if it is toward a cliff edge.
And Mike, one quick thing, there's a kind of a positive note. Prince Bandar Bush has been arrested in Saudi Arabia, so something's going on over there.
Yes, very much so.
And I don't, yeah, so, and remember, he was the one responsible for getting, like, the Bin Laden family flown out of the United States on 9/11 while all the other flights was down. And he's also the one who is pushing all these terrorists around like the chessboard. So
yes.
He's a dangerous man. Dangerous man.
Yep. Absolutely
thanks,
agree.
Mike.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are open again. And as you know, in the last few days, there has been a big stink about Judge Roy Moore, and there has been this claim that he sexually assaulted or tried to sexually assault 4 teenage girls many, many years ago when he was in something like 30s. And he made advances to underage girls, 4 of them. Now, Mark Levin is already tearing that story apart and pointing out these 4 girls didn't know each other. It's not like they were all in the same room at the same time and Moore came on in and made advances to them. But there were these 4 girls. They don't know each other. They've never met. And yet somebody had all their names and information to give to the Washington Post, which makes it look like this was an information feed or a disinformation feed to go after Judge Moore. And we don't know why. We don't know why Moore would be a threat to somebody. But he is fighting back and saying it is completely made up. And that's always going to be a real possibility. The greater the hysteria on all this sexual scandal gets, the more and more of these fake accusations are going to happen. To get somebody's name in the newspaper, to maybe extort some hush money, or to use as a political weapon to bring down an opponent. And we have to be very, very careful about that. Now, yes, there's a lot of sexual assault going on in Hollywood and in Washington, D.C., and in corporate boardrooms. But we shouldn't take all of these allegations at face value. We have to evaluate them all one by one and see whether they're real or whether it's just somebody trying for a few moments of media fame. And that, too, is a reality. Now, the American branch, if you will, of Russia Today has finally agreed they will register as a foreign agent, even though they see this as basically an escalation of the war against the Russian media, and they're basically calling it McCarthyism on steroids, and they're absolutely right. Now, if you know anything about the McCarthy commie witch hunts, they got completely out of control. And again, we had somebody, Senator Joseph McCarthy, who really didn't have much of anything to be famous about, and all of a sudden he goes on this anti-communist witch hunt, and he's a media star, and the media is promoting it. Oh, we got to badmouth the commies, and he had his moment of fame, and nobody would even question what he was doing until Edward R. Murrow stood up to him and pointed out that McCarthy was ruining totally innocent lives. It was the era of the Hollywood blacklisting, the anti-communist blacklisting that destroyed many careers and actually drove some of the most creative people out of the industry, which is why the quality of Hollywood films declined precipitously during that era. So, again, they're trying to go back to the model of the old Cold War, because it meant instant obedience from the American people, non-stop cash pouring into the military-industrial complex, nobody questioning what wars the U.S. was getting involved in. Oh, it's against the commies, that's all I need to know. There's only one component missing today, and that is that the naive, trusting American population of the 1950s doesn't exist anymore. Today's Americans are skeptical. They don't trust the government. They don't trust the corporate media. And that's why this attempt to get a new Cold War or a new hot war going is in serious trouble already. Now, there's an article out of Strategic Culture, How Israel and Saudi Arabia Conspired to Seize Control of the Middle East. And basically, they're starting with that recent leak of that classified Israeli Foreign Ministry cable that was sent to all Israeli diplomatic facilities, basically to try and bring about political discord in Lebanon and a Saudi military confrontation with Iran. So once again, Israel's right at the heart of this stirring up toward a major war. Just like they were right there alongside the United States going into Iraq. They're still cheerleading going into Iran. Israel loves wars because they don't have to fight them. You do. Israel loves wars because they don't have to pay for them. You do. Such a deal. Now, the leader of Hezbollah is looking at more and more confirmation that Lebanese Prime Minister Hariri resigned under duress from the House of Saud and may be under house arrest in Saudi Arabia. And basically saying Saudi Arabia wants to impose a new prime minister on the people of Lebanon. In other words, a regime change to bring Lebanon in line with the accepted global international agreement of whatever it is they were agreeing to here. Now, another article that's coming out of Press TV is apparently E. Michael Jones was interviewed by Press TV. And he came on out and said that Saudi Arabia may have kidnapped Hariri on orders of Israel to try and just get something going. I mean, they've lost big time in Syria, and they don't want to have to admit that, so they're just going to go to a plan B and kick up a war in Lebanon and possibly one in Iran if they can get going for it. And we've been talking about all these countries like Bahrain and Kuwait and Saudi Arabia telling their nationals to get out of Lebanon immediately. They're all using that word. And a lot of people were saying maybe it is a forecast of a Saudi attack on Lebanon. Maybe not. Could be Israel. Israel's right there. Israel may just decide to go into Lebanon. It's not the first time they've invaded and attacked Lebanon. They still want that Litani River. And so it might be Israel that's getting ready to attack Lebanon, while Syria is goaded toward a war with Iran. And this one could really spread over much of the globe, because French President Emmanuel Macron had a surprise trip to Saudi Arabia to have talks with the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who's due to become the king here almost immediately. So now France is dipping their foot into that Middle Eastern quagmire. Macron is also out there saying that he wants to amend the Iran nuclear deal to avoid Tehran's hegemony in the Middle East. So Iran is the new enemy. Ooh, the new evil country. We have to do something about them. We'll be right back after these few commercials. Erica, welcome back to our show here. And one of the issues with Israel trying to partner up with Saudi Arabia is a political one. And that is, of course, that Saudi Arabia is part of many nations in the Middle East who are very upset over Israel's treatment of Palestine and the Palestinians. And so apparently, to try and pull all these nations together in a coalition against Iran, the Saudis are now courting Palestinian support. And they're going to Abbas to try and get some kind of a deal where the Palestinians will say, well, in the interest of getting with Iran, we're going to stop whining and complaining. I don't think they're going to get it, but it is a major sticking point. But all these nations in the Middle East, and that includes Saudi Arabia, need to look at what happened to Iraq, need to look at what is supposed to happen to Iran, and realize they're in that line somewhere. Because the goal is to take all those nations and smash them into smaller countries that are easier to bully and push around. And Saudi Arabia is not immune from that, especially with all the oil. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Peter in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I wanted to point out something about that you were saying. Just like the evidence it points to Israel and Saudi Arabia, but primarily Israel, being behind the expansion of the war, just like they were drumbeating for us going into Iraq, and they drumbeat for us to go into Syria and Libya and everywhere else. But it's interesting that people are now wanting to register RT as an agent of a foreign government, but they do nothing about MSNBC and the New York Times and CNN and everything else, the Wolf Blitzer network and what have you, that are all completely drum-beating organs as well.
Well, I'll give you an even more obvious. I'll give you an even more obvious hypocrisy. What about all these Spanish language stations? Why aren't they registered as foreign agents of Mexico?
That's a good point. That's a good point. Mike, did you see the thing on happening in Britain right now about they caught one of their legislators, their ministers of parliament, or actually as a cabinet member, who was a fifth columnist for Israel? Priti Patel is her name?
Yeah.
Did you happen to see that?
Yeah, I did, and she was having all these secret meetings with Israel, and she's been forced to step down, is the good news.
Right, and promising them basically support on BDS and money being funneled somehow to Israel.
Yeah,
and this is an Anglo-Indian. This is not somebody who's Jewish. She's Anglo-Indian, but she's just bought and paid for by the lobby.
Absolutely, and there was a recent documentary in Great Britain on the power of the British Jewish lobby. And, of course, the Jewish lobby tried to get it banned from the air, but it was looked at by the governing organization and said it is fair, it is honest, it's accurate, and it's unbiased, and it was allowed to be broadcast. And now the people who produced that are getting ready to do one right here in the United States of America. And absolutely, we should do the same thing. If we catch any of our politicians putting the interests of Israel over the interests of the United States of America, they should be thrown out. We can't tolerate that kind of deception and corruption in our country.
Well, you remember, like, for instance, historically, Rahm Emanuel, who in 1991 put on an Israeli uniform rather than an American one when we went to war in the Persian Gulf War, Desert Storm. But Rahm Emanuel, when he was in Congress, was in charge of making sure, vetting all the congressional candidates for the Democrats.
Yes.
And they either got his approval or they didn't get to be candidates. And one of his ironclad things that he required was you had to be a lockstep supporter of Israel, or you didn't even get, you couldn't even possibly be a candidate for the Democratic Party. Then if you look at Podesta and Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and just go down the list of all the people who control both these parties and who finance them.
We're living under puppet rule. We're living under foreign puppet rule, and we should be no more content with that than the people of Libya or Iran or any of these other places under foreign puppet rule. Iran not at the moment, of course. They kicked their puppet out. All right, well, listen, Peter, got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, next year, fiscal 2018, the total budget of the Pentagon will be more than $700 billion with a B, which is $26 billion more than requested by the White House. And there is $5 billion in that budget specifically earmarked to counteract Russian aggression. Even though nobody can actually say that there's any indications of Russian aggression, we have all these NATO troops all around the Russian borders in Europe. We don't see Russian troops on the northern side of the border with Canada. We don't see Russian troops on the southern side of our border with Mexico. We don't have Russian aircraft carriers and other warships tooling around the Gulf of Mexico. It is very obvious that Russia is not the aggressor here. And they're still out there screaming how Russia stole Crimea, which is an absolute flat-out lie. It's yet another lie to basically sell you on the idea that you're going to have to just deal with higher taxes and get nothing back for any of that money, and you're going to have to say goodbye to your children because they're going to go off and fight this war against the evil Russians here. But it's time to stop saying that Putin invaded Ukraine and annexed Crimea. And yes, they're trying to use the big lie tactic here. If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people eventually come to believe it. And that's advice coming right from Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister. Just keep repeating the lie, keep repeating it over, and eventually everybody will say, well, everybody is saying it, it must be true. Now, Putin did not invade Crimea in 2014. Russia does have a naval base in Sevastopol, and it's normal for Russian soldiers and sailors to be in Crimea. It didn't represent an invasion. And Crimea wasn't even really a part of the Ukraine. When the Soviet Union collapsed, it was known as the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. And Ukraine just sort of said, well, yeah, we'll be buddy-buddy with you. And that's really as far as it went.